All right, there we go. All right, so yeah, we've been over contracting as far as the Corbin's on contracts, but today we're going to go over a little contract videos that gives a little better breakdown of modern day contracting, but the contract laws still apply. Okay, so we're going to be talking about why your rescission of contract documents, why they have power. Okay, so we got Trey up in here. What up?
You already know. I'm gonna shut my ass up too.
All right, so let me switch screens so y'all can see the screen. Oh, wait a minute. All right. Was that David just rung in late? Yep. That's David just ringing in late.
Never late, right on time.
All right.
All right, y'all. So again, we got these videos we're gonna go over today. Excuse me. So they're about 7 minutes in total each video. Then we'll watch a video on contracting, then we'll talk about it. This first video is on social stratification though. So there's two parts of this video that's going to set it up. One is talking about, one part is going to be the caste system, and then slavery, how slavery interacts with social stratification. Mute your phone, people. God damn it. Thank you. All right, here we go. Mute your phone if you just rang in. Mute your phone. All right, so this is on social stratification. This is a professor at a college giving a lecture on social stratification. So this is just the first part. We got two parts, so let's sit back.
Today is not well, before I actually get to the caste system, the class system, actually, I want to say a few words about one more type of social stratification, which used to be extremely prevalent, and it's not quite as strict as the caste system, but it's much more strict than our class system, and that's the idea of slavery. Now, you think slavery is probably the worst thing you can think of, okay? But in fact, slavery was something that people could be bought into and bought out of. In a caste system, there's nothing you can do, right? A slave slavery has been around for as long as human beings have had societies. It was a major source of labor for most traditional societies. People became slaves for many reasons. And slavery was not always the way we necessarily think of it or the way it is today. There were, in ancient Greece, for instance, slaves were able to have any sort of profession, and they were able to own money, but they were still subservient to their masters. There was times when people would sell themselves into slavery because it was a choice of either I will be completely given over to somebody else to work at their will, or I will starve. Well, not much of a choice, right? I'm willing to work the rest of my life, and so as long as I'll have a life more than 4 or 5 days, or maybe a month or two, I don't know how long it takes for somebody who's starving to dissipate, but I don't even want to think about that one. Many societies looked for slaves, and that's when we had the slave trade, certainly like we had in the transatlantic slave trade. But prior to that, many societies looked for slaves, and the reason why they looked for slaves is because they needed slave labor. It's a cheap form of labor. They would go out and have wars, for the specific purpose of getting more laborers for their own homes. So there was actually two reasons why somebody would become a slave, either because it was a safe way for me to be safe, right? I was under the auspices of somebody else, but I didn't have to worry about food and board and living. I can actually live. I have a skill that's good for so-and-so. I'm a great carpenter. I make great tables, but economy is bad. I can't even buy wood. My family is starving. You know what? I'll sell myself as a carpenter for a rich family, and I'll live my life. Okay. In other words, it makes sort of sense. But if that was the case, then somebody's want to he's actually buying a capital investment that he wants to take care of. Of course, that doesn't mean it was always like that. There was, and like when you take like the POWs, the prisoner of wars, who were taking the slaves, take the Roman galleys. They were the ships of Rome. They were powered by slave labor, and the slave laborers who were rowing the boats, right? They rowing the boats for 8 hours a day, right? In warships, they were rowing the boats. They didn't get much to eat, and they were like, most of the slaves were still slaves the way we think of it today. Today, actually, slavery is still exists in most parts of the world. There's only 2 countries that we know that there are no slavery. That's Greenland and Iceland. Slaves can be bought. The problem today with slaves, and this you can look on a TED.com lecture that you could find there on slavery. You can search slavery and you'll find this lecture. And that tells about what the slave industry is like today. There's 27 million slaves in the world today. Sounds like a huge amount of numbers, but percentage-wise, it's very, very low. There's $40 billion worth of economy in the world economy. That's a very small amount. And slavery, the problem today with slavery is that you can buy slaves really, really cheap today because of the market, right? Whatever it is, slaves can be bought in some parts of the world for as little as $5. When you think about it, $5 for a fisherman, right? For a slave boy fisherman, $5, right? How valuable, money-wise, how valuable is that? Not very much. So you you work as much as you can, and then it doesn't work. It's like he says there, it's like a styrofoam cup. You finish, and you throw it away. There's no need for it. The slaves, that's the most expensive place where you can, is the United States, where you can buy a slave for up to $8,000. It's an amazing sort of thing that even exists. But since it's a small part of the economy, and since it's not really percentage-wise a huge amount, and because they're very cheap, truth of the matter is, would only take, according to this particular lecture, $10.8 billion to emancipate and rehabilitate all the slaves in the world. Now, that is not really a lot of money on a global scale. It's certainly not the money for the United States government. It's something that really has to be looked into, and I would be really happy if somebody, in the sound of my voice, works on that, especially if somebody in my class would want to work on that. And you can always get in touch with me, and I'll show you how. Or you can go on TED.com and look for slavery and listen to the lecture and get in touch with the organization. Works fine. Okay, the third system, the third way of stratification, which is the major way of stratification in the world today, and that's the class system. As I mentioned before, the difference between a caste and a class is that we have more mobility. It doesn't mean that it's completely mobile. On a statistical level, it's not. These seems to be really, really strict. A little bit of history. The class system became strongly structured with the Industrial Revolution. At that point, without the legal constraints of companies, they became great industrialists, became the wealthiest people that ever lived in the world were the great industrialists of the Industrial Revolution. People like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Jay Gould, others became fantastically wealthy. At the height of the Industrial Revolution, as I mentioned before, the disparity between the wealthy and the poor was fantastic. It was somewhat similar, reminiscent to the disparity between the wealthy and the poor in France prior to the French Revolution. And that led Karl Marx to develop his ideas that he published in the Communist Manifesto, or in his book Das Kapital, where he talked about what is the capitalist system and why it is doomed for failure. Got it a little bit wrong, but these contributions to economic thought and sociological thought were tremendous. Probably because, of course, that he was actually an economist. He wasn't really a historian. He certainly wasn't a sociologist. He was an economist. And he looked at the difference in class based on basically one factor. The factor that he had as the basic idea was that whoever owned the resources, sources of production, the means of production, that was the one class. The other class were those who did not have power and were able to control the means of production. When you think of it, what does it mean? When a class of people or a person has control over the means of production, the means of production means he has a factory. The means of production means he owns the material, he owns the land or the machinery in order to produce whatever it is you want to produce, right? So if you want to produce clothing, you want to produce hardware, you want to produce anything, right? There is a place where it's being produced. Excuse me. And that is, somebody has to own that. If that's whoever owns that, that is the person who owns the means of production. And those are either called the capitalist, one word, a capitalist, or in his words, the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is a French word meaning, as far as we're concerned, those people who own the means of production. Now, what about everybody else? Where did everybody else fit in? Well, if you don't own the means of production, you still have to feed your family. Right? If you don't own a factory, you still have to feed your family. You don't own it. You own your clothes. You own the table. You own whatever food you have. It doesn't last very long because you're eating it. You're not producing anything. Well, how are you going to make money? You have your hands, right? And you can use your hands to sell your labor. If you sell your labor, then you're the proletariat or the working class, right? It's either, there's two words, again, just like capitalist and bourgeoisie, and those are the wealthier means of production people, and the other people need to sell their labor, and they sell their labor to the bourgeoisie. They sell the labor to the capitalists. They are the laborers, the workers, or the proletariat. Okay, and these are the two classes that Marx saw in constant conflict one with the other. Very simple reason why, right? They're in constant conflict because the people who own the factories are trying to make as much money as possible. One way of reducing the costs and therefore increasing profits is by getting as much work out of the laborers for at least amount of pay. Because if you pay the people less, then your profit is more because there's a bigger gap between how much you're spending and how much you are selling your product for. And so,
all right. So the reason we played that video is because it was two things. He was talking about slavery at the first part, and how slavery there are different things to slavery. How slavery wasn't the same as it is today. A lot of people would voluntarily go into slavery because they had no other choice in society. It was a way of sort of elevating themselves in society, which is crazy to think, but that by placing yourself in servitude, that it's actually a way of elevating yourself. But it was, because if you had absolutely nothing, then what you had was your labor, your work. And so that's what you could pledge in order to, to feed your family or to elevate your whole family. And even family the word family is household of slaves. So all of this still is the whole slave system. So, you know, a serf, let's say a male serf would, you know, he would pledge his work, you know, or his labor to the landlord, and as well as, so what he called his family, or actually the landlord would call it his family, because the landlord or family means the whole household of slaves, or the number of slaves under one household. So the man serf would take care of the land as well as watch over the family, which were the slaves of the noble class, or of the lord who owned the land. He would watch over that. He would watch over that group of people for the noble. Now, even though that was his wife and those were his kids, it was still the slaves of the lord who owned the land. So just going through that, you know, through that slave system, and then coming up what he was talking about through the class system, which is, you know, is every system that's in society today is that system. So as you can see, upper class, middle class, lower class, they don't even hide it from you. They tell you you're in a class system. Okay, so what does that mean? Where do I fit within that class? Okay, so as he was talking about, you know, the wealthy back in the day, Karl Marx viewed class system as being either you were productive or you were not productive. And so this is where we're moving to. As far as you being sovereign, I want you guys to fully understand the mind state that you have to be in to be sovereign. If you're not fully taking care of yourself, if you're reliant on someone else, you're not sovereign, or you're not self-governing. Remember, that's where we are, self-governing. Sovereign, we all have to be self-governing people that come together to agree, you know, to combine our powers. However, separately, we're self-governing people. And unless you, if you under someone else, if you're doing, you know, if you're reliant usually on someone else to pay you, to pay your bills, to do anything for you, you're not fully self-governing, because when that dude cuts your money off, then your self-governing is done. So I'm saying this because, you know, I'm not trying to down anybody who has a job or anything. I just want you guys to understand what a sovereign or a self-governing mind state truly is. It's, you know, a lot of people, they see these videos, you know, about, you know, maritime admiralty law and slavery, contract slavery, and you know, UCC, and they see all this stuff and they say, oh, I'm in the bullshit. How do I get out? Out is not for everybody. So this is what this class is done for you guys to understand. Some people work well within the system, and if you're not going to be that type of person that takes control of your life and your family's life, and try to elevate it and do it, you know, and do it on a conscious level, then if you're one of those people who sit back or who works well within the system, then do that. That's what you need to be doing, because if you don't understand, or when you don't understand that you have to fully be on your P's and Q's when you're self-governing, it's not going to necessarily work for you. So what that means is understanding how to contract. Okay, so how not to be obligated, how to come together with an equal party and then not leave that equal party being obligated to them. That's a skill. Okay, and that's understanding and learning law. So these are some videos we're gonna watch on contracts, and most of them are about 7 to 8 minutes long. So we're gonna watch one and then go over it, what is discussed, and then jump back into another one. And some of them kind of cross-reference because it's the same person talking about contracts. So some of them cross-reference some of the information, which is good. So you'll get it twice, and so you'll understand it. So this is just the introduction to contract.
Restatement contracts. With this unit, we begin our study of the Restatement of Contracts, 2nd edition. The Restatement of Contracts is one of a number of restatements of the law which are periodically issued by the American Law Institute. The ALI is a national organization of legal experts. Its primary purpose is to draft and revise the restatements. The first Restatement of Contracts was issued in 1932. It was largely the vision of Professor Samuel Williston and reflected a formalistic philosophy of contract law. Formalism assumed the law could be organized into a set of coherent rules that, when properly applied, would lead to consistent results. The Restatement of Contracts was revised in 1979. It is this second version of the restatement that we will be studying. The second restatement was largely the vision of Professors Arthur Corbin and Carl Llewellyn. Their philosophy of
Corbin on Contracts. That's the guy who wrote Corbin on Contracts, Arthur Corbin.
Contract law was less focused on precise formulas and more informed by pragmatics. It tended more toward policymaking and preferred to set standards, such as a reasonable time, rather than precise rules. The official purpose of each restatement is to restate the common law based on a survey of cases from all state jurisdictions. Each restatement addresses a particular area of law, such as contracts or torts. The goal was for each restatement to accurately summarize the current state of the law in each area, that is, to state the black letter law. It is important to understand that the restatements are not themselves law in the sense of being binding authority or legislation. Sometimes, however, a particular restatement section will become law if it is adopted by a particular judge in a specific jurisdiction. At that point, the restatement section so adopted becomes part of that state's common or judge-made law.
So, just getting back to this really quick. So, as you saw, that the guy who kind of made this restatement. So the restatement was just basically some way that they came up to contract a system of a way to contract today. Then they come up with this body of stuff. As he's saying, if the judge adopts it and uses it, then it becomes law. As you know, judges don't enact law, they interpret law. So if this judge uses an interpretation or this interpretation of the law within his ruling, then it becomes law. So this is what they're saying. So this is just to let you know, this is just a formal understanding of how they tried to reform contracting. Now the old rules of contracting still apply. This didn't rewrite the rules of contract. What it did was try to create a new system of contracting, but it doesn't retake the old form unless a judge act positively and acts it in law. Okay.
Let's begin at the beginning. With Section 1 of the Restatement of Contracts, Section 1 is short and sweet and provides us with a definition of the word contract. This section is often paraphrased as, a contract is an enforceable promise. If you think about it for a moment, you will realize that this is not the usual meaning of the word contract. In fact, Section 1 is necessary because contract has several common meanings. It often refers to the written document, signed by both parties, that sets out the parties' agreement. Sometimes, however, parties have an oral agreement. That is, they do not write anything down, but instead orally agree to certain terms. And sometimes the parties have a written document, but in addition they have orally agreed to one or more supplemental terms beyond those set out in the writing. So in some cases, contract can also refer to the actual agreement of the parties, which is not set out or not completely set out in a written document. It is a common misconception among non-lawyers that there is no contract if there is no writing. But that is not always the case. Many oral agreements are just as legally binding as a written agreement. The specific meaning of the word contract as used in the restatement presents us with a conundrum. If a contract is a legally enforceable promise, we can't actually know what is or is not a contract until and unless the enforceability of the promise is litigated in a court of law. The comments to Section 1 try to finesse this by saying that when a promise is described as binding, a synonym for legally enforceable, it means that there is a legal duty to perform the promise if the promisor has full capacity, if there is no illegality or fraud in the transaction, if the duty has not been discharged, and if there are no other similar facts which would defeat the prima facie duty which is stated.
Okay, so just really what, in layman's terms, what this meant really quick. If you have a verbal contract, right, the verbal contract will be binding, okay, it will be legally binding if the person who promises to do the contract, if he has full capacity to do it, meaning if you promise me to do something and you can do it, that's one stipulation. Then if there's no illegality or fraud, like if I didn't con you into telling me that you would do this act for me, then that's another part of it. If a duty has not been discharged, if I didn't say to you, that's all right, homie, you don't got to do it. If I didn't say that to you or any of the words like that, then that's one part of it. And then also if there's no similar facts which defeat prima facie evidence. So meaning if we have that verbal agreement, then you come in and you state, well, yeah, even though I said that, remember I said this, I said, well, that's only in case if I do this. And so if you come back with a rebut of the agreement, if you come back and say, well, that I didn't really say it like that, I said it like this, okay, then that's prima facie evidence, you know, at first glance, or prima facie means at first sight evidence that I wasn't agreeing with the contract. And so then that can void the contract. But if all these things line up, if I have capacity to do it, if I can do whatever I said I would do for you, if the person who I'm doing this for didn't trick me into doing it, if they didn't say that's okay, you don't have to do it, or if I don't come up with something to the contrary of my promise, then that verbal contract is legally binding, okay, in law, or it's presumed to be legally binding until you come up with a rebuttable presumption, which is what we'll get into later, dealing with your contracts, with your paperwork when you're filling out your paperwork.
Those are a lot of ifs. So is the restatement saying that a contract is a legally enforceable promise unless it's not? Actually, no. What the restatement is saying is that a contract is a promise which has been made in such a way that we can presume a court will enforce it unless and until one party establishes that they have a defense against enforcement or an excuse for not performing. Defenses and excuses in this context will refer to legally recognized justifications for not performing the contract, and later in the course, we will examine these in some depth. There are millions of contracts made every year, and the overwhelming majority of them never see a courtroom. The parties do what they have promised to do, and they move on. The parties act if they have a contract in the restatement sense of the word, meaning a legally enforceable set of promises, without ever putting it to the test by asking a court to decide whether their mutual promises are legally enforceable. It is only a tiny fraction of the contracts made in any given year, only the tip of the iceberg, that ever involve problems. And most of those problems are resolved without involving the judicial system. Contracts that result in litigation are truly the tiny tip of the iceberg. But of course, those are the contracts we will be studying. Section 1 says in effect that a contract is a legally enforceable promise. What is a promise? Let's look at Section 2 for the answer. In Section 2, subsection 1, the restatement provides us with a definition of promise. Note that subsections 2 through 4 of Section 2 basically provide us with some vocabulary words. Promisor is the one making the promise. Promisee is the one to whom the promise is made. And a beneficiary is one who is not a party to the agreement, but stands to benefit from it. An important aspect of the restatement definition of promise is that it establishes what is called an objective standard for determining whether someone has made a promise. The section defines promise as a manifestation of intention that justifies the promisee's understanding that the promisor is making a commitment. So the section requires an external sign. For example, spoken words or a handshake. These are manifestations which a reasonable person would understand to be making a commitment. To put this the other way around, the promisor's internal intention is not what the section is looking to. So, here's an example. In a famous contract case, Lucy versus Zemer, Zemer wrote the words, "I promise to sell the Ferguson farm," on a bar tab receipt. When Lucy tried to enforce the sale, Zemer said he was only joking. In its opinion, the court weighs carefully the context in which Zemer's promise was made to determine whether a reasonable person standing in Lucy's shoes would have understood it was a joke. Ultimately, the court decides that even if Zemer was joking, Lucy was justified in believing he was serious. Consequently, the court orders Zemer to sell Lucy the property. Under the objective theory of contracts, it doesn't matter what your secret intent is. What matters is what you do and say.
You guys get that? What matters is what you do and what you say. Doesn't matter what your intent is. It's only what we can see, which is why your express notification, your express dissent or assent of anything is of the tantamount importance.
Is that Kevin? Is that why people don't shake hands? Like, for example, there's a couple of business people, like even Donald Trump is known for not shaking hands,
Really?
not touching hands. Yeah.
That could be a main reason. Somebody who's who's doing billion-dollar deals, when if a handshake can be taken as or misconstrued as a contract, you probably don't do that. So I mean, I don't know if that's the reason for sure, but that would be definitely a good reason why he wouldn't.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So now the next one is so this is just a short breakdown on the bargaining section. So this is going to actually tap on pretty much a lot of the things with a lot of the stipulations in contract altogether. So this is actually just a smaller breakdown of it, of everything, and then we'll get into the other stuff.
This module will cover the basic requirements for a contract. Not all promises are legally enforceable. Implicitly, Restatement Section 1 tells us this when it defines a contract as an enforceable promise or set of promises. If all promises were enforceable, we could just define a contract as a promise or a set of promises. Common sense also tells us that not all promises are enforceable. Otherwise, if you promised to call someone on Tuesday and you forgot, they could sue you for breach of contract. To distinguish a legally enforceable promise, a contract, from what is called a social or donative promise, meaning in effect a promise to make a gift, we begin with Section 17. The general rule is found in subsection 1. Note that this section includes two separate concepts: manifestation of mutual assent, often shortened to just mutual assent, and consideration. We're going to look at each of these concepts individually and then consider how they work together to form a contract. Manifestation of mutual assent. Section 18 defines manifestation of mutual assent. Frankly, this definition doesn't really help us at all that much.
So just so we have it on video, so the manifestation of mutual assent to an exchange requires that each party either make a promise or begin or render a performance.
In Unit 3, we're going to explore the concept of mutual assent in more depth. But for now, keep this in mind. The requirement is for a manifestation of mutual assent, that is, a visible sign of assent. For example, a handshake is often a visible sign that two people have come to mutual assent. Another common way to manifest assent is for two people to put their signatures on a written contract. Their signatures are the visible sign that each is assenting to the promises made in the written contract. However, shaking hands or signing on the dotted line are not the only ways to manifest assent.
Now, do you see why it's so important for you to sign all rights reserved on your contracts? Because if you don't, it's a sign of assent Like, yeah, and assent is, you know, actually, anybody has the Black's Law Dictionary, look, read the legal definition of assent for me, please. First one to it, get to do it.
All right. Assent. It's page 149 if y'all looking for it. Compliance. Approval of something done. A declaration of willingness to do something in compliance with a request. To approve, ratify, and confirm.
To approve, ratify, and confirm. So when your signature is there, that means I approve, ratify, or confirm this unless I expressly show otherwise. How do I expressly show otherwise? Okay, I agree to this, but sorta, because I reserve all my rights just in case. You know what I'm saying? I don't really feel like messing with this dude. He does some shady shit on the back end. If it's, you know, he tries to add something to this contract, if he, you know, if I find that it's frauded, or you know, at the end of the day, when we when we're doing the contract, I feel that you know, upon performing the contract, that it's not agreeable to me to continue the contract, then I reserve my rights to rescind the contract. If I don't do that, then I can't. If I don't reserve my right to do that, then the contract has to go all the way through, and then I have to take it to court in order to seek remedy from a judge. Now the judge has to rule on it. Whereas, and usually that's the way it would be as well. But whereas if I just have all rights reserved or without prejudice next to my name, then that shows I can void this contract upon you know whenever I want to. And it's not just because just out of nowhere. It has to be, so you have to have some type of good reason to be able to do that. You just can't be like, you can't sign deals with people and put all rights reserved and have them put all their energy into some shit for like 2 and 3 months. And then you say, you know what, I'm good. You can't do it like that. It has to be for some reason why that you're severing, that you're rescinding the contract. It has to be a viable reason as well in law that you're doing that. Something like duress, fraud, anything like that.
The question of whether both sides have manifested assent to the agreement ordinarily only become important when a dispute arises at an early stage in the parties' relationship. A typical situation raising the issue is where one party believes that both sides have agreed to the contract, while the other party believes that the two sides are still in negotiations. Consideration. There's an old joke that says law is a foreign language that uses ordinary English words in extraordinary ways. Consideration is a perfect example of this. A layperson would hear that word and think of a respectful way of treating others. But consideration is also a term of art in the law. In the language of law, consideration refers to that which distinguishes a legally enforceable promise from one which is merely social or donative. Section 71 introduces us to this concept of consideration. In subsection 1, it states,
to constitute a consideration, a performance or return promise must be bargained for.
Subsection 2 elaborates on this.
A performance or return performance is bargained for if it is sought by the promiser in exchange for his or her promise and is given.
Section 17.
This dude is moving way too fast. Hold up. And is given by the promisee in exchange for that promise.
So, Section 17 tells us that in order for there to be a promise which is legally enforceable, that is, a contract, we have to have consideration. And Section 71, subsection 1, tells us that consideration is a return promise or performance that is bargained for. And finally, Section 71, subsection 2, tells us that something is bargained for when it is what is sought in exchange. So, let's give an example of how this works. Think of a seller who wants to sell a widget. A widget is a thingamajig, and it's often used in contract hypotheticals. The seller is willing to sell a widget if someone promises to pay $500. The seller and a buyer enter into negotiations. The seller promises to sell the buyer the widget if the buyer promises to pay $500, and the buyer so promises. Is there consideration for the seller's promise to sell? Well, is there a return promise? Yes. The buyer has promised to pay $500. Was that return promise bargained for? Yes. The seller wanted the promise of $500 in exchange for his promise to sell. Note that there is also consideration for the buyer's promise to pay $500. The buyer is willing to promise to pay $500 in exchange for the seller's promise to sell a widget. When something is bargained for, it is often referred to as the quid pro quo. This Latin phrase translates as this for that. Another way to think about it is that the price of the seller's promise to sell is the buyer's promise to pay, and the price of the buyer's promise to buy is the seller's promise to sell. We could visualize the concept this way. Think of a table with you and me sitting on opposite sides. On the table, in front of each of us, is a box. I say to you, I'll give you my box if you give me yours. And you say, okay. Each of us is willing to give up our box in exchange for the other's box. So my box is the consideration for your promise, and your box is the consideration for my promise. This concept of bargain for is distinct from the concept of dickering. Sometimes students have looked at the widget hypothetical and concluded erroneously that the promise to pay $500 was not bargained for because there was no bargaining in the sense of dickering over the price. The seller said, I'll sell you the widget for $500, and the buyer said, okay. There may not have been any dickering in this exchange, but the reciprocal promises to sell and to pay were bargained for. That is, each promise was made in exchange for the reciprocal promise.
Somebody in your dictionary, look up bargain for me. Please.
I got bargain.
Okay, hit it.
The mutual undertaking, contract, or agreement. A contract or agreement between two parties, the one to sell goods or lands and the other to buy them. As a verb, to sell for cash or on terms rather than to trade or exchange.
Is there any little small writing under it like that would explain it further?
Yeah. If the word agreement imports a mutual act of two parties, surely the word bargain is not less significative.
Significant?
Significative.
Oh, significative?
Significative.
Significative. Significative.
Significative of the consent of two. In a popular sense, the former word is frequently used declaring the engagement of one only. A man may agree to pay money or to perform some other act, and the word is then used synonymously with promise or engage. But the word bargain is seldom used unless to express a mutual contract or undertaking. That's it.
Okay.
The concept of bargain for is important to understanding the concept of consideration because it distinguishes contracts, that is, legally enforceable promises, from social or donative or gift promises. For example, at Christmas or Hanukkah, you may give me a gift and I may give one in return, but that exchange of gifts is not bargained for. That is, you did not offer me a gift in order to get a gift in return from me. In other words, I did not bargain for a gift from you. Now, You may have expected a return gift from me, and there may be social consequences, such as shaming or shunning, if I fail to give you a gift in return. But we did not agree that you would give me a gift if and only if I gave you a return gift. We did not bargain for the exchange of gifts. To sum this up, remember that a gift can never be consideration. The two are mutually exclusive. The sale of the widget is a simple transaction between two parties exchanging two promises. Sophisticated commercial transactions can involve multiple parties exchanging multiple promises. Contract lawyers often diagram commercial transactions to help them understand the exchanges. So here's an example of such a diagram for this simple transaction. To summarize, in order to find a contract, that is, a legally enforceable promise or set of promises, we must find that the parties have agreed, that is, manifested their mutual assent, to a bargain for exchange of promises, or a promise for a performance, that is, an exchange of consideration.
All right. Anybody have any questions on that?
I got plenty.
Go ahead. We'll move on.
All right. So, to that first case law that they brought up regarding a contract about intent, it was my understanding that the only reason why intent on part of the guy selling his farm, it was the fact that it was a presumption of law that he agreed by not saying anything.
Well, we're going to get in presumption in after most of this, that because presumption is the main part of what we're talking about.
Oh, okay.
Because all right. You're writing your documents under the doctrine of presumption, which is why your documents are going to stand in law. So we'll get to that in a second, in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Another thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as the offerer, what am I talking about? As long as the offerer doesn't take back his promise or the offer, still going to be valid. As far as, let's say, if the lady or the woman didn't really want to take or enforce that contract right then and there, is that something that becomes statutory?
Wait, say that again, because the last part went out.
She took 3 months. Would it be something of a statutory law?
If she took 3 months to what?
Involving contracts? Let's say instead of going, 3 weeks, and the guy was like, "Oh, I'm joking." Like, what? I'm trying to figure out what was her intention in going into court in the first place.
Well, they had a written. Did you see the piece of paper? It was written down on a piece of paper. You didn't see that? That he showed you the piece of paper.
Right, but no, I saw it. They showed it.
Right.
But my question is, she wanted to enforce it in the court after he told her already, "Nah, I was joking."
No,
so it's almost like
he didn't know. Well, he didn't say that. Well, I guess they made the contract and he didn't do it, and so then if that's something that she actually wanted, like if she was serious and he came together and he was joking, but he didn't express intent that he was joking, then that led her to believe that the contract was serious. That's an enforceable contract in law, because you didn't express any intent or any there was no expression to the fact that you were that this was a joke.
All right,
but that's
so
what I'm saying.
if he said that I was joking,
wait, everybody speak. Only one person speak at a time. So go ahead. Who's talking?
Dre, I know what you're about to say. But she went straight to the court though. It's either could go out one or two ways. She went.
What'd you say?
To the guy to go, "Hey, are you gonna sell it to me?" And he said, "Nah, I was joking." Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yo.
Yeah.
You hear me? Yeah, my fault. Wi-Fi is ass over here.
Keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Keep going. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. It could either go one or to enforce the contract herself.
No,
and he said no.
Well, she couldn't. No, she can't go to. Only the court can make you.
I don't know if you could
force a contract.
Damn, I'm going.
Basically, I was about to say. So if he had said, "Oh, I was joking," while they were making the verbal contract, then that would have voided the contract.
Yeah, but there wasn't a verbal contract. It was actually written down. Like
okay, so if he had wrote it on a piece of paper, "I'm joking," ha ha ha, then I would have voided the contract.
Or if he expressed, or if he verbally expressed, yeah, while he was right, he didn't. The joke part didn't have to be written down within the contract. If he was writing the contract, or if they were both writing out the contract, and he was like, and he just, laughed, or and he expressed some type of joke within the bargaining, then that would lead a reasonable person to believe that he wasn't really serious. But
okay, because he was basically giving intent during the drawing up of the
exactly that it was a joke. Now, if we come together and we both got straight faces and we writing this out, and then 3 months later you be like, "Oh, I was just joking," just because you don't want to do what's in the contract, you can't do that. You can't say I was just joking. So that's why.
Gotcha.
You took it to court. So now this is mutual assent, meaning this is what we're just talking about. Expressing assent, your agreement. Mutual agreement, or expressing your mutual agreement to the contract.
This module will address the issue of mutual assent. Specifically, we will consider the most traditional way in which mutual assent to a bargain is accomplished, by offer and acceptance. To review, we learned in section 17 of the restatement that, to form a valid contract, there must be a bargain involving both mutual assent and consideration. We're going to focus on the first of the two requirements for a bargain, mutual assent. Let's first consider why the restatement consistently refers to a manifestation of mutual assent. Modern contract law is based on an objective theory of contracts. We are concerned with how a reasonable person would interpret the words or actions of a party, not with the party's subjective thought process. Section 21 of the restatement makes this clear by stating that a party's subjective intentions are irrelevant to whether a contract has been formed. The relevant issue is whether the words and actions publicly manifested by the party should be interpreted as an assent to a contract.
Yeah, so neither real nor apparent intention that a promise be legally binding is essential to the formation of a contract, but a manifestation of intention that a promise shall not affect legal relations may prevent the formation of a contract. Okay? So again, but a manifestation of intention that a promise shall not affect legal relations may prevent the formation of a contract. So that would be like if you're joking, if you express that you're joking.
Determine whether a party is assented to a bargain, contract law looks to objective evidence, such as a signature on a writing, spoken words, or a party's behavior like a handshake. Section 22 of the restatement sets forth the way in which mutual assent ordinarily takes place, through offer and acceptance. The formal structure requires that one party, the offeror, make an offer to enter into a contract on specified terms to the other party, the offeree. If the offeree accepts the offer, there has been mutual assent and a binding contract is formed. Sometimes, the process leading up to the formation of a contract is extremely simple. One party makes an offer, and the other party immediately accepts that offer. So, the offerer says to the offeree, "I will sell you my 1990 Chevy for $1,000. And the offeree responds by saying, "I accept your offer." Clear and simple. A contract has been formed. But sometimes the formation of a contract is not so simple. The two parties sit across a bargaining table all afternoon, going back and forth over the details of the deal they're attempting to hammer out.
But always remember what we went over before. I think it was in class number 4, about contracts, about power of acceptance. Okay, so if we go back and we look at this, where the guy, the offerer, he goes, I offer you such and such, for the car. And the offeree says, great. Now the offeree doesn't have to say that. The offeree has the power. If he comes to you and says, I'll sell you my truck for $1,000 or whatever the money was, the offeree can say, no, sell me your car for $800. So he has the power of contract because this dude right here came to him first. So he has the power to make the contract now. Power of acceptance. That's what that's called. You want me to accept your deal, then this is what I need in order to accept the deal. The offeree always has the power within the contract from the offerer. Okay, remember.
Question.
Yo.
Does this still apply to employment contracts? Since you go to them for employment, they then have power of acceptance over you.
Well,
Since you came to them.
Well, look. Do you look up the term employee? Paper turning is loud as shit.
Oh shit! All right, hold on.
God damn, they got a mic on his papers on the fucking book. All right, let's go.
You might not be an employee unless you work for the government.
Now read. So who hasn't? Somebody have employee? I'll read it. I got it. So
after all that turning up.
Go ahead, read it. If you got it, go ahead. Knock it out. You said after all that turning, did somebody got it?
All right. No, I got it, but I thought that was Trey. Hold on. Page 617. Employee. This word is from the French, but has.
You can't read, David. Your Wi-Fi.
Damn it, David.
All right, I'll read it. I'll read it just to ask the question.
David,
well, damn.
Your Wi-Fi is fucked up, David. So somebody else got to read that. Like Megatron times 10, homie. All right.
This word is from the French, but has become somewhat naturalized in our language. Guilty. Strictly and etymologically, it means a person employed. But in practice, in the French language, it ordinarily is used to signify a person in some official employment, and as generally used with us, though perhaps not confined to any official employment. It is understood to mean some permanent employment or position. The word may be more extensive than clerk or officer, and may signify anyone in place or having charge or using a function, as well as one in office. One who works for an employer, a person working for salary or wages, applied to anyone so working, but usually only to clerks, workmen, laborers, etc., but rarely to the higher officers of a corporation or government or to domestic servants. Generally, when person for whom services are performed has right to control and direct individual who performs services not only as to result to be accomplished by work, but also as to details and means by which result is accomplished. Individual subject to direction is an employee.
Now,
servant is synonymous with employee.
Bam.
Hold on, let me bring my highlighter up real quick.
That's what I was waiting for you to get to. that one right there. Again, servant is synonymous with employee. Bam, you are a contract slave. So pretty much, you're a contract slave, but you're not an indentured servant. You're just a regular servant. Pretty much. You are a indentured servant because when you fill out your W-2 and all the rest of that and your application, it's a contract, but it's a unilateral contract, which we're going to get into again on here. So let's get back to this.
But sometimes the formation of a contract is not so simple. The two parties sit across a bargaining table all afternoon, going back and forth over the details of the deal they're attempting to hammer out. Each proposes changes as the afternoon wears on, some of which are accepted by the other, some of which are not. At the end of the day, they realize they have an agreement acceptable to both, and they shake hands. Subsection 2 of Section 22 makes clear that, in some situations, it will be difficult to identify which party is the offeror and which is the offeree. Nonetheless, in situations where it is clear that the parties have mutually assented to the terms of a bargain, the restatement concludes that a contract has been formed despite the uncertainty as to who is the offeror and who the offeree. I want to give you an overview of the process of mutual assent, a process that we will break down and study in detail in the next few modules. The process begins by one party, the offeror, making an offer to the other party, the offeree, to enter into a contract on specified terms. When the offeror makes an offer, a power of acceptance is created in the offeree to bring the contract into existence by manifesting his or her accepting the proposed terms of the contract. If the offeree accepts, a contract is formed on the terms specified by the offeror in the offer. Alternatively, the offeree can reject the offer. If it does, there is no contract. The last possibility is for the offeree to make a counteroffer by proposing an alternative offer on terms different from those proposed by the offeror in the original offer. If the offeree does so, the counteroffer effectively operates as a rejection of the offeror's original offer and the making of a brand new offer. The parties now switch positions. Upon the offeree's making of a counteroffer, the offeree assumes the position of offeror, and the original offeror is now the offeree. The process of offer and acceptance starts all over again. We will consider each of the main elements of the process of mutual assent: offer, acceptance, rejection, and counteroffer in the next few modules.
As we just went over, power of acceptance. Anybody any questions on that before we get to the offer? Nope. All right, here we go.
The next few modules will break down offer and acceptance, one way of establishing mutual assent to a bargain. This module is going to focus on the offer. We learned in Section 22 of the restatement that the ordinary way that mutual assent comes about is through one party, the offeror, making an offer to the other party, the offeree, and the offeree accepting that offer.
Now, really quick, the reason we're going over this is because of your contracts with the government, okay? And the reason you're able to rescind these contracts. But you need to, this is one of the reasons we're going over it. But the other reason is because you need to know how to contract if you're going to be self-governing citizens or people. If you have no idea how to make your agreements or how to not be obligated by someone else within your agreement, then you're still a minor. You're someone who doesn't know how to contract or under the legal age or legal age of competency of contracting, meaning you don't understand contract. So in order for you to be of the majority, you have to understand how to contract and how not to obligate yourself in contract, okay? So this is why we're going over this.
The offer is defined in Section 24 of the restatement.
An offer is the manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain, so made as to justify another person in understanding that his assent to that bargain is invited and will conclude it.
Particularly important section, and it deserves our close attention. As we've previously discussed, modern law is based on an objective approach to contracts. Therefore, the question of whether an offer has been made focuses on the offeror's acts that have been communicated to the offeree, acts such as oral or written statements, or perhaps physical acts like nodding one's head. The question comes down to whether such acts would be viewed by a reasonable person as indicating the offeror's willingness to enter into a bargain. An offeror's subjective state of mind is basically irrelevant to whether or not an offer has been made. A common maxim of contracts law is that the offeror is the master of the offer. This means that she can propose whatever terms she desires to be a part of the offer. Of course, the offeree is free to accept or reject those terms. Section 24 further states that to be an offer, the offeror's proposal must invite acceptance from the offeree. Moreover, that section tells us that to constitute an offer, the offeror's proposal must be in terms that create a reasonable understanding that if the offeree does accept, a contract will be formed without any further approval on the part of the offeror. Let's explore the idea of creating a reasonable understanding that acceptance by the offeree will conclude the bargain by using an analogy of a tennis game. For an offer to have been made, the offeror's communication must lead the offeree to believe that the ball is now in her court and that she now holds the power of acceptance. If an offer has been made, all the offeree has to do to create a contract is to say, in effect, yes. A bargain is completed. No further act of the offeror is required. Moreover, once the offeree accepts an offer, the offeror has lost the power to revoke or change the offer. The requirement that an offer create a reasonable understanding in the offeree that his acceptance will form a contract is what distinguishes an offer from mere preliminary negotiations, an overture to an offer, which is defined in Section 26 of the Restatement.
A manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain is not an offer if the person to whom it is addressed knows or has reason to know that the person making it does not intend to conclude a bargain until he has made a further manifestation of assent.
Therefore, if in her communication the offeror reserves the final power to say whether she will be bound by the contract, that communication is not an offer, but merely preliminary negotiations. The hallmark of the offer is putting the power to create the contract in the offeree's court. One critical requirement of an offer is that the terms specified by the offeror be reasonably certain. This requirement is set forth in Section 33 of the Restatement.
Even though a manifestation of intention is intended to be understood as an offer, it cannot be accepted so as to form a contract unless the terms of the contract are reasonably certain.
Thus, if one party says to the other, "I'm interested in selling my car to you," in all likelihood, a court would not interpret that statement to be an offer because a critical term, the price, is left uncertain. Rather, it would probably be considered to be an invitation to the other party to make an offer, to propose a price at which it would be willing to buy the car. Discussions like this are preliminary negotiations under Section 26 of the Restatement. Thus, one critical factor that distinguishes preliminary negotiations from an offer is whether the communication from one party to the other sets forth the essential terms of the proposed deal, terms like price, quantity, and date on which performance is to take place.
So is everybody following this? Do you understand what this means? Well, let me just break it down just for those who don't understand. See, excuse me. So let's read this. The fact that one or more terms of a proposed bargain are left open or uncertain may show that a manifestation of intention is not intended to be understood as an offer or as an acceptance. Okay, so basically, the parts of a contract: offer, acceptance, and consideration. If one of those aren't there, it's not necessarily a contract. It's an intent to contract. It can be just understood as an intent to contract, not as an actual offer. Okay, so you have to have the three main things: offer, acceptance, and consideration. Okay, so one of those not there, it's not necessarily considered to be an offer.
That would lead the other party to believe that an unequivocal offer has been proposed. The reason given by the restatement for the certainty requirement is that if one party sues the other for breach of contract, a court must be in position to determine what the terms of the alleged contract are in order to decide whether there has been a breach of that contract and what an appropriate remedy should be for that breach. If the terms of the offer are uncertain, a court will not be in a position to determine whether there has been a breach and to decide upon appropriate remedy.
All that means is if those three, hold on. So all that means is if those three forms, if those three stipulations of a contract aren't there, then the court can't rule as to whether there was a breach of contract or not. Okay? Offer, acceptance, consideration.
So what is the effect of the offerors making an offer to the offeree? Section 35 of the restatement explains that once an offer has been made, the power to accept the offer and thereby create a contract shifts to the offeree. We're going to explore acceptance in the next module. But we learn in Section 36 of the restatement that the offeror can short-circuit the offeree's power to accept by revoking the offer before the offeree accepts the offer. Section 42 of the restatement explains that the offeror can revoke the offer by communicating to the offeree her intent that the offer no longer be effective. Notice that a revocation does not result simply from the offeror sending out a communication indicating her desire to revoke the offer. To be effective, the revocation must be received by the offeree. Nonetheless, Section 43 makes clear that if the offeree learns through indirect channels that the offeror no longer desires the offer to be effective, that knowledge will also serve as an effective revocation of the offer.
Okay, so an offeree's power of acceptance is terminated when the offerer takes definite action inconsistent with an intention to enter into the proposed contract, and the offeree acquires reliable information to that effect. Okay, so basically, when an offeree gives some form of intention to accept the offer that's been made by the offerer, then his power of acceptance is terminated. So basically it's like not showing all your cards. Okay, so again, as he was stating, anyone who's making the offer has to wait for the power of acceptance by the offeree. Okay, so that's like if you come to me with a contract, you say, all right, I'll buy your car for $1,000. And I say, no, I want $1,500. Okay, now I'm the offer, and that's my counter offer to you. Then you have the power to say, nah, I'm good. Or, vice versa. So you're constantly playing as he showed, you're playing tennis, back and forth, knocking that ball back and forth. Okay, what about this? All right, what about that? All right, what about this? What about that? If you're not on equal grounds, then that's going to be something called a unilateral contract, as we'll see when we get up. So we're going to move on to from that one, and you guys understand that acceptance, power of acceptance.
So, Kev, you're going to be able to go over of bills and complaints as forms of contracts?
Bill, you mean like bill of attainder?
Right, from the so-called policy enforcers.
We'll see if we can get into that. We'll look up bill of attainder. We got time. We'll jump into that.
All right.
But we have to get through this first because this is of the utmost importance in you guys filling out your documents, okay? Because I'm not going to be there to write your documents for you, to sign your documents for you. You guys need to understand how to do this and not be obligated, okay? If we go back to Trey's definition when he was reading employee, what page was that? Was 617? So, no, excuse me, 620.
That's 617.
617? Okay. All right, so, but if you actually 618. So if you go into 618 and you look at it where it says servant is synonymous with employee. Actually, but before that, so it says individual. So let me read the last line of page 17. So this is generally when person for whom services are performed has right to control and direct. See these different terms? Control and direct individual who performs services, not only as to the result to be accomplished by the work, but also as to details and means by which the result is accomplished. Individual subject to, remember that term, we went over that before, subject to, individual subject to direction is an employee, okay? You're subject to direction. You're an employee. And again, serving is synonymous with the term employee. So, subject to, okay?
Subordinate.
Yeah, subordinate. You guys have to learn how not to be subject to when you're dealing in contract. So, a good example would be something like this. Like I'm what's called an independent contractor, right? So what that means is someone hires me to perform services that I offer in my own way, okay? So they can't tell me how to do my job because they're coming to me for my services that I offer in my way. Now, if at any point in time when I'm training them, they tell me, well, I want to do squats like this, or we need to do push-ups like this, or you know, you need I want to learn to throw hooks like this. Then I become an employee because they're now directing me as to how I should do my job. Okay, if they're able to tell me how to perform my services, if they're directing me again or under control as to the way of how I perform my services, then I become an employee. I become a servant. Independent contractor is you come to me as an independent party, as an equal party. We come together, as equal parties. You come to me for my service. I give you my service in the way I created it and perform it, and you accept it in that way, and we're both equal parties. If you're able to tell me any type of way of how to do my job, then I become an employee. That no matter, even if I call myself an independent contractor, I'm still legally termed as an employee if you're able to tell me how to do my job. Or service, I should say. So this is acceptance. So we went over acceptance. Basically, he covered both of those. We wanted to keep going. We'll go over in depth. but I want to get to the unilateral contract and also under duress, contracts under duress. Okay. So this is a unilateral contract, or unilateral means one-sided contract.
This module will cover the topic of unilateral contracts. In this unit, we are going to look at the differences between bilateral and unilateral contracts. Bilateral means two-sided. Unilateral means one-sided. All contracts can be divided into these two categories. A bilateral contract is one where each side makes, or could make, a promise. So there are potentially two sets of promises. The offeror makes a promise, and the offeree accepts, or could accept, by making a return promise. For example, a builder promises to construct a home for a homeowner, and the homeowner accepts by promising in return to pay for the construction of the home. A unilateral contract is one where the offeror makes a promise, but in exchange does not want a return promise. Rather, the offeror demands a performance. The quintessential unilateral contract is the reward. Say my cat goes missing, and I put up posters all around the neighborhood, promising $100 to anyone who finds and returns my cat. You see the poster, and you call me up and you say, I accept your offer, and I promise to find your cat. Do we have a contract? No, I'm not interested in your promise to find my cat. You might not be able to find my cat. In fact, if you promise to find my cat and cannot, I could sue you for breach of promise. But I'm not interested in suing you or recovering damages for your failure to find my cat. I just want my cat. A reward or any other offer for a unilateral contract, in essence, says, I promise to pay money if and only if you perform some act. Every contract other than a unilateral contract is a bilateral contract because it involves, or could involve, two promises, one on each side. Now, don't let that could confuse you. In some situations, the offeror may give the offeree the option to accept either by making a promise or by beginning performance. So, Restatement Section 30, subsection 2 states,
unless otherwise indicated by the language or circumstances, an offer invites acceptance in any manner and by any medium reasonable in the circumstances. So, just to put this in context, the unilateral contract where it says, I promise to do this if you perform a certain act. So this is what the federal government does when they naturalize. So you pledge your allegiance. That's your part of the contract. You're pledging your allegiance or duty of a liege man to his lord in order for the protection of the United States government. That's the contract between the two. Okay, as well as some form of that is what everyone has within the corporation. So, we allow you, we do this for you. So we'll give you protections, quote unquote protections. And then you promise your allegiance, you promise to do this, you promise to do that, you promise to do that. So, but it's a unilateral contract really, because you don't really understand that you're promising to do anything. Okay, you don't really understand it. It's not like you're coming back. They say, okay, I'll do this, and you come back actually speaking to them and saying that it's only the stipulations. Either you accept or you don't. That's what a unilateral contract is. It's like I come to you, this is what I'm offering. Either you accept it or you don't. And then most people don't understand that's a unilateral contract, or that's a contract at all. And your parents actually do the accepting for you. And it's up to you to understand these and understand contract and to pull yourself back out of it or reposition yourself within the contract to where you have power within the contract.
Moreover, Section 32 states,
In case of a doubt, excuse me, in case of doubt, an offer is interpreted as inviting the offeree to accept either by promising to perform what the offer requests, or by rendering the performance as the offeree chooses. Okay? You get that? Let's get that again. In case of doubt, an offer is interpreted as inviting the offeree to accept either by promising to perform what the offer requests, or by rendering the performance as the offeree chooses. Okay?
These sections mean that, unless the offer explicitly says otherwise, the offeree can accept by either a return promise or by performing the requested act. But it would be incorrect to conclude, and this is where the confusion seeps in, that if the offeree decides to accept by performing, we're talking about a unilateral contract. Nope, wrong. Think of it this way. The offeror is master of her offer, and so she is the one who gets to decide whether her offer is for a unilateral or a bilateral contract. And once that choice is made, it cannot be altered by the offeree. By choosing to make an offer that can only be accepted by performing, the offeror makes an offer for a unilateral contract. By choosing to make an offer that can be accepted either by a return promise or by performing, the offeror makes an offer for a bilateral contract because it could be accepted by a return promise. So there could be bilateral promises, even if ultimately it turns out that there isn't because the offeree accepts by performing. But the fact that ultimately there was only one promise does not alter the fact that the offeror's offer included the possibility of two promises. In real life, there are very few unilateral contracts. In the majority of cases, the offeror is actually looking for a return promise, a bilateral contract, like in the builder-homeowner hypo. The builder is incapable of performing immediately. Even on Extreme Home Makeover, it takes them a week. And the homeowner is probably not interested in paying today for something he won't get for another 8 months. In some subset of cases, the offeror is indifferent whether the offeree accepts by return promise or by performing. But these are also classified as bilateral contracts because potentially they could involve two promises. In other cases, the offeror might be thrilled to have the offeree perform immediately, but is willing to take the offeree's promise to perform at some time in the future. So, the seller promises to deliver the widget to the buyer by the end of the month if the buyer pays now or promises to pay at the time of delivery. Even if the buyer opts to pay now, that doesn't change the contract from bilateral to unilateral. The offeror gave the offeree the option of promising to pay later, so potentially there were two promises in the deal.
So you see why your government contract is a unilateral contract, because it doesn't really give you you don't offer another promise. Really, you actually just perform the duty. Either you're going to be a citizen and you're going to perform these duties as a citizen, or you're not. So either going to be a citizen or you're not going to be a citizen. This is what being a citizen entails, or a citizen employee, really. This is what this entails. Either you do this or you don't. You don't promise to do it. You're doing it or you don't. If you don't do it, then you're not a citizen. Especially if you're naturalized. If you're born here, then that's a different. You're born in a certain country, then that's a different thing. But if you're naturalized, that's a contractual. That's a contract. That's a contract citizen, which everyone is pretty much now under 14th Amendment. But it's you do this, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? We offer protection, and you have to do this for that protection. And you don't get to say, well, okay, I'll do this, but not that. You don't get to say that. It has to be 100%. I'm doing this, or you don't sign the contract, or there's no contract.
In only a minority of situations does the offeror desire only acceptance by a performance, that is, a unilateral contract. Two common examples of unilateral contracts involve offers of a reward, like we've just discussed, or offers of a bonus, a type of reward, if an employee performs at a specified level, like more than $200,000 in sales. But such kinds of contracts occur very infrequently as compared with the contracts that are, or could be, accepted by a return promise. Moreover, in most situations, it does not matter whether a contract is unilateral or bilateral. The only time it matters is when we are considering the issue of mutual assent. More specifically, the often interrelated issues of whether there is an irrevocable offer and whether there has been an acceptance. A word to the wise here. Many times on exams, students have devoted a lot of space and energy to determining whether a contract is bilateral or unilateral in situations where it doesn't matter, which means that even if they correctly categorized the contract, they got no points because whether the contract was unilateral or bilateral wasn't an issue. Whether a contract is unilateral or not matters with regard to the issue of whether the offer has been accepted. If the offer is for a unilateral contract, the offeree can only accept the offer by performing. Moreover, acceptance does not occur until the performance is complete. So let's consider the famous Brooklyn Bridge hypothetical. It's discussed on pages 61 and 62 of your text. In the hypo, the offeror said, "I will pay you $100 if you will walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, not if you promise to walk across the bridge." That would be a bilateral contract. But if and only if, in fact, you complete the act of walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, that is an offer for a unilateral contract that can be accepted and only be accepted by walking across the bridge. Acceptance in the hypo would not occur until the offeree completed the requested performance, that is, finished walking across the bridge. Now, recall from Unit 5 that an offer is freely revocable until accepted, and put that together with the rule for acceptance in unilateral contracts, and we discover that under the traditional conception, an offeror could revoke the offer for a unilateral contract at any time prior to the offeree's acceptance, which could only occur when the offeree completed performance. In other words, if the offeree had walked all the way across the bridge, except for one final step, and at that precise moment the offeror yelled, "I revoke!" there would be no contract and the offeree would not be entitled to the $100. Classical contract doctrine was not concerned with the potential unfairness of the offeror getting half or more of what he wanted without becoming obligated to pay for it. Supporters of classical contract doctrine would point out that the offeree was never obligated to walk across the bridge. In other words, the offeree could start walking across the bridge, grow tired, and return to his starting point with no repercussions whatsoever, because he never promised to walk across the bridge. So neither side had any obligations to the other unless and until the offeree walked all the way across the bridge. Or at least under classical contract doctrine, would there be no consequences if the offeror revoked after the offeree had partially performed? As we will see in the next module, by the time the second restatement rolls around in the second half of the 20th century, the offeree's part performance could, in some cases, prevent the offeror from revoking his offer until the offeree had the chance to complete performance. Moreover, today, in real life as opposed to hypotheticals, there are usually other alternative causes of action, including unjust enrichment and promissory estoppel, both of which we will cover in later modules. Nevertheless, there are cases where the offeror successfully revokes an offer for a unilateral contract prior to the offeree's completing performance. Patterson v. Patberg in the text is an example of this traditional notion of unilateral contracts.
All right, one-sided contracts, the government. So like you said, they're very rare one-sided contracts. You know what I'm saying? It's, you know, where somebody says, all right, if you do this, I'll give you that. You know, it's very rare when somebody will, you know, just do that without getting promised something back in return. But so we have 2 more to go over, and then we're going to move to we're going to do presumption of law. Okay, so this is the consideration of a contract. Okay, so always has to be consideration within a contract. You're given something. Within a 14th Amendment contract, you're given privileges and licenses for your, you know, for your signing your stuff over. Not rights, privileges and licenses.
This module focuses on consideration. As we discussed in Module 2, in Section 17.
So the formation of a contract requires a bargain, which there is a manifestation of mutual assent to exchange and consideration.
Is that in order for there to be an enforceable contract, there must be a bargain in which there is a manifestation of mutual assent to the exchange and a consideration. In this unit, we are going to look at the concept of consideration. Section 71, subsections 1 and 2 give us a definition of consideration.
So to constitute consideration, a performance or return promise must be bargained for. A performance or return promise is bargained for if it is sought by the promisor in exchange for his promise and is given by the promisee in exchange for that promise.
In other words, consideration for a promise is the thing or action that the promisor wants in exchange for his willingness to make a promise. The Latin phrase for this is quid pro quo, which translates as this for that. Understand that in almost all commercial contracts, consideration is not an issue. Almost all commercial contracts involve a promise to pay money in exchange for a promise to provide goods or services, or both. So if I promise to sell you my bike for $300, the consideration for my promise to sell my bike to you is your return promise to give me $300. And the consideration for your promise to pay me $300 is my return promise to sell you the bike, money for goods. Similarly, I can promise to pay you $30,000 if you design my house. The consideration for my promise to pay you $30,000 is your return promise to design my house. And the consideration for your promise to design my house is my return promise to pay you $30,000, money for services. As we saw in Module 7 on unilateral contracts, less frequently, we see contracts where one side promises to pay money in exchange for the other side performing some act. So for example, in the classic unilateral contract involving a reward, I promise to pay $500 to the person who finds my lost dog. The consideration for my promise to pay $500 is the act or performance of finding my dog. I'm not interested in your promise to find my dog. If you do find my dog, that both serves as your acceptance of my offer and functions as the consideration for my promise. At that point, we have an enforceable contract. So why do we need consideration? What is the function of the requirement for consideration? Basically, the requirement of consideration functions to distinguish contract, meaning a legally enforceable promise, from a promise to make a gift, sometimes called a donative promise. And why do we need to distinguish between these two kinds of promises? Under classical contract doctrine, a promise to make a gift is not a legally enforceable promise. The person promising to make a gift is free to change her mind at any time up until the gift is completed. Although later in the course, we will find that some gift promises become enforceable under the doctrine of promissory estoppel or reliance. So the requirement of consideration is how classical contract doctrine distinguishes between promises that are legally enforceable and promises that are not. In the context of intrafamilial promises, that is, promises between family members such as parents and children or uncles and nephews, it can sometimes be difficult to distinguish unenforceable gift promises from contracts. Family members can and do contract with one another. A brother may sell his house to his sister, or a mother may hire her son to landscape her yard. But family members also often promise to do things for one another just because they're family. Or even more problematic, family members may make reciprocal gifts to one another. and in such cases it can be tricky to distinguish a bargain for contract from a promise to make a gift. In older cases from the 19th century, often involving family members, you will see another definition of consideration. A promise has consideration when the transaction involves a benefit to the promisor or a detriment to the promisee.
All right, so I want to see how well you guys are understanding this. So can anybody tell me what consideration is in layman's terms, in case someone just had walked up to you and asked you what that was, or you had to explain it to somebody?
Is this for anybody?
Yep, and first person who asked, who sounds out.
This for that. There's a mutual assent, and there's a promise for a promise.
That's not layman's terms.
I mean, all right. Well,
what I mean is, so if I came, so in the simplest of terms, what is the difference between consideration when you're offering a contract and one thing is a gift? Just how does he explain? Because he kind of just broke it down.
Okay, well, a gift would be one way where there's no consideration needed for me to give you something.
But what is consideration? So you're saying you're using the term. I want you to define the term.
That's the only way I can define it.
So think about it.
What the hell is that? Yo, somebody mute your damn phone.
It sounds like your voice being looped.
That's not me.
That was interesting.
So consideration. Trey, what is consideration?
You kind of got me, bro. You kind of got me a little bit. I'm sitting there. I'm reading, taking notes, trying to go over my notes and all that, taking all this in.
So consideration. Somebody is tripping with their phone right now. All right. So consideration, in the simplest terms, this is consideration. Does anybody want to have a stab at it before I say?
Is it simply enforceable by law or unenforceable?
Is it an offer? I mean,
no.
In order for me to get something from you,
wait, say that again. Who said that?
I did. DC.
No, somebody said offer. Who said that?
I said offer. Trey.
That's exactly what consideration is. All it is an offer to give something back. So a gift is, if I give you a gift, I don't want nothing back in return for a gift. Okay? But if I give you something and then I say, okay, for this, you got to give me back that, that's what consideration is. Or if I do something for you, or if I do this, then you give me that. That's what consideration is. The promise to give something in return for something.
But doesn't it have to be accepted? Because I could give you a gift and you can give me a gift, but there was no consideration.
No, the consideration is the intention of doing something. So it's more of the
promise.
It's the promise. Well, it's not necessarily a promise. I guess it's a promise. I guess you would call it a promise.
No, that's why I use the word promise for a promise.
It's not a. I don't want it because it's not necessarily a promise because I guess it's promised, but I guess it's legal.
Hey, I'll give you Cheetos if you give me chips. Isn't that simple?
Yes.
Let me just give you my chips and you give me your Cheetos separately.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't necessarily have to be a promise. It just there's an exchange involved and there's an object of exchange involved. That would be the consideration. It doesn't necessarily have to promise to do it. It's just what I'm saying.
All right, so I don't need to give you something in order for me to get something from you.
Wait, say that one more time, Megatron.
If I explicitly, like Will just said, you give me potato chips for my Cheetos, but I will go.
No, you're right. It'd have to be. I will give you my Cheetos if you
right.
give.
That's the consideration, right?
That's the consideration.
Otherwise, you don't get shit.
Otherwise, it's just a gift. If you give me Cheetos, you're looking out.
Right.
So it's almost something like if you like in junior high, and it's just like trading lunches kind of deal. Almost something simple like I'll give you my sandwich, you give me a cosmic brownie kind of thing.
Yes, that's consideration. That's a contract. That's a contract. If I just walk up to you and say, "Yo, you want my brownie?" You know what I'm saying? That's a gift. And if I say, "Yo, you want my brownie?" and then you took it, and then because I gave you my brownie, you gave me your chocolate milk. Those are two gifts back and forth. But if you only gave me your chocolate milk because I gave you my brownie, then that's consideration. Okay? Man, I'm about to jump to this damn thing, boy. All right, here we go. Mute your phone, everyone.
The hell is that?
All right, here I go.
This definition, however, proved to be unsatisfactory because courts got distracted by deciding what was a benefit and what was a detriment. So, for example, if a father promises to give his son a new car if the son finishes college, is there consideration under this older definition? Is there a benefit to the father? Well, there's certainly no chance of a pecuniary benefit, quite the opposite. Does the pride or relief he will get from his son being a college graduate count? Probably not. Well, then is there a detriment to the son? Consideration requires benefit to the promisor or detriment to the promisee, not both. One or the other is sufficient. Some would argue that there is no detriment to the son in having a college degree. Rather, that's a benefit. Others would say, in the context of the law of contracts, a detriment is doing something you are not already legally required to do or refraining from doing something you have a legal right to do. The son is not legally required to get a college degree, so his getting one at his father's behest is a legal detriment. Moreover, having concluded that getting a college degree constitutes a legal detriment, we are not done with our analysis. That is because a promise to make a gift can come with a condition, and a condition can be a legal detriment. So we could think of the father saying, I promise to make you a gift of a new car, provided that you finish your degree. Finishing his degree is something the son is not legally required to do, and so it's a detriment. But that detriment is not a consideration, rather it's a condition to a gift. Williston, the drafter of the first restatement, used what has become to be a famous hypothetical to illustrate this difference. The hypothetical has become to be called Williston's tramp, and this, roughly paraphrased, is what he said. Suppose a rich man says to a tramp, if you walk around to the corner to the clothing store, I will buy you a coat. Is walking around the corner a detriment? Yes, because it's something the tramp, the promisee, is not legally required to do. Is that detriment consideration, though, or is it a condition to a gift? Most agree that the tramp's walking around the corner is the condition to a gift. The reasons people come to this conclusion vary, however. Some would argue that walking around the corner is a condition to a gift, because in order for the coat to fit the tramp, he had to go to the store and try it on. By this line of argument, we can distinguish between detriments that are consideration and detriments that are conditioned to gifts by asking whether the thing, the detriment, is something that is a necessary precondition to receiving the gift, analogous to someone saying, put out your hand so I can give you this money.
So what is a detriment? And as far as contracting, your legal contracting, can anybody understand what a detriment is before we move on?
Something that legally binds you?
No.
Something that benefits someone else?
No. Shit. You're close. You were close. It's the opposite.
If you get harmed?
No.
Doing something?
It's the opposite of what Trey just said.
Trey, what'd you say?
Forgot, bro. I forgot
what you just said.
I told you I got a messed up memory. I've been told y'all that. So shut up.
After you stop smoking weed before class?
Why are you saying it? Man, listen, I ran out, all right? Somebody answer a question.
That's messed up,
I'm trying to be a phoenix over here. You bringing the dragon out of me, Kev.
I'm just
He's trying to be civil.
You trying to be civil? Yeah, you do that, bro. All right, so a detriment, as we get back on track, detriment. What is the actual definition of a detriment? So it's pretty much the same thing. They're not. It's not. It doesn't really differ in the legal definition. So if something's a detriment to me, what is that to me?
Wouldn't that be a risk?
Not necessarily. Something that leaves me at a loss. That's what a detriment is. So how when going back to the example of the father saying, yo, if you go to college, the college thing. So the detriment to the kid would be a loss of his time because he doesn't have to go to college. He can do whatever the hell he wants. It's not something that's required to do. So the detriment would be his loss of time, as he wanted to use it or he saw fit to do with his time. So that's where his detriment is. That's where the consideration could be legally construed as consideration because it's a detriment to the son. If he actually tried to sue his father, it could be construed as that. So it's why he's saying this is not a detriment to, in this case, when the person has to go to the coat store to try on the coat, because in order for you to receive the coat, you have to go try it on to see if it fits. So it's not necessarily a detriment. It's a requirement in order for you to receive the contract or to complete the contract. Okay, so it's not necessarily a detriment because you want the coat, but if you can't go, if the coat doesn't fit you, then you can't receive the coat. So you actually have to go try on the coat to see if it fits. So it's not necessarily a detriment to you. All right. So you got it. Detriment is something that leaves you at a loss. Okay.
Putting out the hand is a detriment. You're not legally required to do in condition to receiving the gift. Let's go back. Line of argument, we can distinguish between detriments that are consideration and detriments that are conditioned to gifts by asking whether the thing, the detriment, is something that is a necessary precondition to receiving the gift, analogous to someone saying, put out your hand so I can give you this money. Putting out the hand is a detriment. You're not legally required to do it, but it is what one has to do in order for someone else to hand you the money. Others would argue that this is an inadequate distinction. They would point out that when the father promises to give his son the gift of a car, provided that son graduates, graduating isn't a necessary precondition. The father could give the gift of a car without the son graduating. Others would agree that walking around the corner is a condition to a gift, but the reason would be because of the context. There is no benefit to the rich man other than feeling good for having done a good deed, sometimes called warm fuzzies and generally understood not to be consideration. So we are left with the rich man conveying something of value to a homeless beggar. And our contextual understanding of that situation is that the rich man is being charitable and giving a gift to the poor man. These folks would conclude that in this situation, there's no bargaining behavior occurring. They would say there's no bargain for consideration. And remember from the second module that bargaining is not the same as dickering. By the way, a student once proposed a variation on Williston's tramp that would suggest that walking around the corner was a bargain for consideration. Professor 3D swears she's not making this up. The student said, what if the tramp walked with a limp? And what if the rich man got some sort of perverted thrill from watching people with limps walk? Then would the walking around the corner be the consideration for the promise to buy him a new coat? The response? Probably yes. Here, there's a benefit, albeit a idiosyncratic one, to the rich man. This would be no different than paying an entrance fee as the consideration for being able to watch exotic dancers. So, to return to our hypothetical with the father, the car, and the maybe graduating son. If a court were to focus on the context, family, father with a ne'er-do-well son, it would tend to suggest no bargaining, but rather a conditional gift. This despite the fact that there is a legal detriment to the son. A court could, however, focus on the fact of reciprocal inducement. That is, the father makes the promise to induce the son to graduate, and the son, apparently unlikely to do so on his own, graduates in order to get the car, and decide that this is bargaining, albeit in a non-economic context. With these close cases, you can't say for sure. So let's review this distinction between gift promises and contracts with an example from real life.
Okay. So we're going to move on to duress because we got some other stuff to cover.
It ain't like they put the black man on the wall, though.
I said they definitely put a black man on the wall and a rich white man in a white hat.
So this is why you're going to be able to, this is why you're able to sever your contracts. It's going to be this right here. Is everything you pretty much have, or all of your contracts have been done out of duress. All right. So this is why, this is our power to sever our contracts with the government.
We have learned that to form a contract, each party must manifest their assent freely and voluntarily. If one party's assent is coerced or otherwise not freely given, the law will not enforce a contract against the party. One form of such coercion is known as duress, which is dealt with in sections 174, 175, and 176 of the restatement. In general, duress involves instances in
Somebody read duress for me.
Hold up. Now I'm gonna mute myself because I'm Morse code, so and you guys can hear that. So hang on.
Anybody got it?
Yeah, I got it. The unlawful constraint exercised upon a man by whereby he is forced to do some act that he is otherwise would not have done. It may be either duress.
Say that for me one more time.
Unlawful constraint exercised upon a man whereby he is forced to do some act that he is otherwise would not have done.
Mm-hmm. Is that it?
It may be either duress of imprisonment, where the person is deprived of his liberty in order to force him to compliance, or by violence, beating, or other actual injury, or duress per minas, consisting in threats of imprisonment or great physical injury or death. Duress may also include the same injuries, threats, or restraint exercised upon the man's wife, child, or parent.
Okay. Now, that's why, for that reason right there is why you can have their documents without being obligated to them. See how it says threat of imprisonment, physical harm, all these different things? That's what will happen to you. If you don't roll around without a license, which you don't have to have, we've seen all the case law that states that you don't have to, that they can't turn a constitutional right into a privilege. So which traveling is a constitutional right, Thompson versus Smith, that and many other law cases. So everything that you do, and if you don't have that document, then you'll be placed in bodily constraint or physical harm. So everything that you're going to do out of that fact, this is where you saw on my document, I'm holding their documents, meaning driver's license, passport, social security card, all of that's held out of duress. Okay, so this is what we're getting into.
One party uses an impermissible threat to pressure the other to enter into a contract. In such instances, the contract is voidable by the victim. Under older contract law, duress was a defense to enforcement of a contract only in extreme circumstances. To invoke duress, a party would have to show that the other had induced her into entering the contract by using actual force or an unlawful threat of death or bodily harm. In other words, under older law, one would have to argue that a proverbial gun was held to her head, and as a result, the victim had no choice but to sign the contract.
Incidentally, just on the side note, this is how America took Hawaii. Hawaii was its own sovereign entity, and they went over there, and a couple of agents or military cats, they went up to the queen and to her palace and held guns to her head and told her she had to sign over Hawaii to America. and she did so. And so now that's how Hawaii became a possession or a state of the United States of America. Now, how do you know this? Because Congress apologized for it. They held a whole goddamn caucus on it, a meeting, and it's actually in public law. Like I actually have it written down, the actual minutes, the congressional minutes where they went and they apologized. And they broke down the whole story of how they went over there and took Hawaii by force. And so they had to apologize for it. And this was all in Congress. This is all in the minutes of Congress and written down. I'll show you guys that one day. But this is what they're talking about. So by duress, usually, or back in the day, it was literally somebody had to put a gun to your head to get you to sign over something. That's how they took Hawaii, is by literal actual duress. Like, you sign this damn contract or you're getting smashed on right now.
This basis for avoiding a contract is still embodied in the restatement in Section 174, which deals with the person's manifesting assent as a result of being physically compelled by duress. In such cases, the party's assent is not effective.
So let's read this. If conduct that appears to be a manifestation of assent by a party who does not intend to engage in that conduct is physically compelled by duress, the conduct is not effective as manifestation of assent. So that's why if you get pulled over and you're doing your law and everything, don't fight them. Don't fight them. That's just stupid. These dudes can blow your damn face off. Sit up here when they start to do their shit and they start to aggressively make you do something. You state, I do this out of duress. I don't assent to any of your terms or any of your commands, and it's all done out of duress. Once you say that, anything that they do now is null and void once you challenge it in the proper venue, in the proper court of law. You can't be messing with these dudes out here. That's just the dumbest shit in the world for you to be sitting up here trying to argue with a goddamn dumbass cop. This motherfucker's an idiot. For the most part, cops are idiots. And that just means common people with no knowledge. So to be trying to argue your point with them is just stupid.
Being physically compelled by duress. In such cases, the party's assent is not effective. Obviously, the occasions on which Section 174 operates to void a contract are very rare. More recently, duress has been expanded beyond these narrow parameters. A person can invoke duress to avoid a contract if they can show that their free will was undermined by an unfair pressure short of physical compulsion or a threat of bodily injury. In particular, economic duress is now recognized as a basis for relief. This more modern doctrine, embodied in Sections 175 and 176 of the restatement, is better able to accommodate situations where one party uses subtle threats or improper pressure to gain the other's assent to a contract. Subpart 1 of Section 175 of the restatement sets forth two requirements for duress. First, a party must show that its assent to a contract was induced by an improper threat.
So if a party's manifestation of assent is induced by an improper threat by the other party, that leaves the victim no reasonable alternative. The contract is voidable by the victim. Okay? So without here, they don't leave you any other they don't leave you any other alternative but to have their driver's license. Because if you don't, you're going to get your ass smashed up. It's even cats with driver's licenses, especially melanated cats, is getting snatched up. So think of you, a melanated cat rolling around here with no damn driver's license. So these are your terms in order for you to be able to void your contracts. Okay?
All right. Am I crazy for wanting to know what the hell is a reasonable threat?
Say, what is a reasonable threat?
Yes, or an unreasonable one in verse.
Well, a reasonable threat could be anything that that can be. I mean, the term reasonable. Is that you, Trey? I think
that's not me, bro. That's not no, it ain't me.
All right, man. So reasonable is going to be usually is going to be subjective. if you are actually threatened, like if something can, when it's termed a reasonable threat, meaning a reasonable threat would be if I say I'm gonna slap the shit out of you, and I'm right in front of your face, that's a reasonable threat. If I say I'm gonna slap the shit out of you and I'm down the block, that's not a reasonable threat. You see the difference? I can't.
Okay, gotcha.
The possibility of me carrying out the threat is so, you know what I'm saying, is so far out there because I'm down the block. How can I touch you? It's it's not a reasonable threat because I'm just talking shit. Whereas if I'm in front of your face and I say I'm gonna slap the shit out of you if you don't move, if you don't do that, then that's a reasonable threat.
You can employ somebody else to.
Well, yeah, you can. That's another reasonable threat too. I'm gonna tell him to fucking break your neck if you don't do this. That's another reasonable threat. If they're within the bounds or range of performing that threat, or if they have actual capacity to perform that threat.
Like carrying firearms and pepper spray and
there you go. That's a reasonable.
But
threat.
don't say nothing to you though.
There you go. That's a reasonable threat. This nigga got a gun. I ain't about to no. I'm not. And he got billy clubs and all kind of other shit, rubber bullets and shit. All right, so here we go.
First, a party must show that its assent to a contract was induced by an improper threat. Second, the party must show that, as a result of that threat, he was left with no reasonable alternative but to assent to the contract. If these two requirements are established, then the contract is voidable by the victim. Note that because the contract is voidable and not automatically void, the victim can choose to follow through on its contractual obligations and seek compensation for the perpetrator's wrongful act in other ways, such as in a tort suit.
So, voidable, but not voided. Why? What's the difference?
One is capable.
One hasn't been voided yet.
One is actually been.
One's still in action, the other isn't.
Wait a minute. So Will and then Trey. Will say that again?
I was just saying voided versus voidable. One is still in effect while the other one is not.
Sort of. All right, Trey, what'd you say?
Voided is an action that already has essentially occurred. Voidable is the capability of it happening.
Right, but what does voidable need?
What does voidable need?
What is voidable?
Rebuttable presumption.
But but it's a rebuttable presumption. But what does it need in order for it to have power? If voided it's already in effect. If something is voided, it's already in effect. Voidable has the possibility of being voided.
Right.
What does it need to be voided?
The contract?
Duress?
Oh no. Ty, you want to try it?
God damn.
Herman? Huh? Somebody's phone, somebody's background shit is going crazy. So who just muted their phone? Whoever just muted their phone, it was them. All right. So let's get through it. So voidable, all it needs something being voidable. So basically what he's saying is, even though it's voidable, if you don't express the intent to void it or the want to void it, then it will still be in effect. It needs you. It needs your express intent in order to be voided. So it just sits there as being voidable. Yeah, it has the mechanism of being able to be voided, but if you don't say so, then it just sits there. So everything needs your express assent is the point I was getting at.
Let's explore the first of the two requirements for proving duress, an improper threat. In general, a threat is an indication of an intent to do something that will inflict harm, loss, or injury on a person's body or their personal or economic interests. The intent does not have to be explicit. It can be implied from the words or the actions of the perpetrator. the threat can be either of a positive action or of a refraining from action. Section 176 of the restatement sets out a number of examples of what makes a threat improper.
So really quick, a threat from action or a threat refraining from action. So meaning they can do something to you, or if you don't do this, then you don't get this. That's a threat from refraining from action. Well, if you don't do this, then we're not going to give you this. So those are the two terms. Those are the two threats. Okay, somebody threatening to do something to you, or somebody threatening not to give you something that you feel that you were entitled to.
So to deprive you, essentially.
Deprive you of something.
Any of which might be described as instances of extortion or blackmail. For example, subpart 1b states that a threat to institute a criminal proceeding is an improper form of pressure. While someone who has a colorable tort claim against another may threaten to file that action absent the other parties agreeing to a settlement, public policy considers a threat to institute a criminal prosecution to be an improper bargaining chip. Consider a creditor who says to a debtor, "Pay me what you owe me or I'll sue." As a result of this threat, the debtor is induced to enter into a settlement agreement. Under such circumstances, it is unlikely that a court will void the agreement based on duress. The creditor was acting perfectly within her rights. Similarly, if at the end of the term of an employment contract, a very valued employee threatens to quit unless her salary is significantly increased, the employer will not be able to avoid a new employment contract at a higher salary on the basis of duress. Again, the employee is acting fully within her rights. In contrast, if at the end of the term of an employment contract, the employer threatens to make it difficult for the employee to obtain alternative employment unless the employee signs a release of all claims against the employer, that might well be an instance of an improper threat. Assuming there is no basis for the employer to badmouth the employee, if the employer could make good on the threat in the local business community, the employee may well be deemed to have no reasonable alternative but to sign the agreement. Under such circumstances, a court would likely consider the agreement voidable by reason of duress. In general, a bad faith threat to engage in vexatious litigation is an improper threat. A threat to embarrass or do something spiteful to the other party to a contract might also be considered an improper threat, a violation of the duty of good faith and fair dealing under subpart 1d of section 176. Let's now turn to the second element of duress, no reasonable alternative. An improper threat does not amount to duress unless it leaves the victim with no reasonable alternative but to succumb to the threat. In determining whether there is a reasonable alternative, two issues arise. The first relates to the victim's emotional state and whether or not he had the fortitude to stand up to the perpetrator of the threat. Under older law, in determining whether a party was left with no reasonable alternative, courts looked to whether the threat was serious enough to compel a person of ordinary courage to yield to it. Realizing that a bully should not be able to enforce a contract merely because his victim is easily intimidated, modern courts take a more relaxed view and now consider subjective attributes of the victim. The modern test is whether, under the circumstances, the duress substantially overcame the free will of the victim, leaving him no reasonable alternative but to acquiesce. As noted in comment C under section 175, persons of a weak or cowardly nature are the very ones that need protection. The courageous can usually protect themselves. But in addition to considering the emotional fortitude of the victim, there is a second issue that bears on whether the victim had a reasonable alternative. That issue concerns the exigencies in which the victim finds himself. If the victim faces financial ruin were the perpetrator to follow through on the threat, then a court might well conclude that the victim had no reasonable alternative but to succumb to the threat and sign the contract. So let's consider two cases. First, assume that Joan enters into a contract with Bill, whereby Bill will supply 1 million widgets to Joan's factory on January 1st at a cost of $1 per widget. Joan is purchasing the widgets to fulfill a contract with the federal government, her major client. performance of which comes due on January 15th. On December 31st, one day before he's contractually bound to deliver the widgets, Bill calls Joan and states that he refuses to supply the widgets unless Joan signs a new contract, whereby she agrees to pay $2 per widget. If Joan signs the new contract, will she have the defense of duress available to avoid the new agreement? Stated in terms of the doctrine of duress, did Joan have no reasonable alternative but to sign the contract? The answer is, it depends. On the one hand, if Joan could walk across the street and purchase the widgets at another factory, it's doubtful that she would have the defense of duress available to avoid Bill's enforcing the new contract. She is not in exigent circumstances. Rather, she could refuse to succumb to Bill's extortionate threat and go buy the widgets somewhere else and sue Bill for breach of contract. On the other hand, if there is no alternative source of widgets, Joan might agree to the new contract in order to avoid breaching her own agreement with her major client. Under such circumstances, a court is more likely to determine that Joan had no reasonable alternative but to agree to buy the widgets at a higher price. Accordingly, a court would likely conclude that the new agreement with Bill is voidable under the doctrine of duress. One problematic aspect of the modern concept of duress is distinguishing between economic duress on the one hand and simple hard bargaining on the other. In general, a seller may refuse to sell property to a buyer or only to sell at an exorbitantly high price, even though the seller knows the buyer is desperate to make a deal. In general, parties are free to drive as hard a bargain as they wish. So let's consider an example. Suppose that Bill is desperate to sell his restaurant because he needs the money to pay for a life-saving operation for his son. Jane is aware of Bill's situation and knows that it'll be hard for Bill to find a buyer in the current market, and as a result, offers to buy the business at a below-market price. Because he's desperate, Bill feels he has no alternative but to accept Jane's lowball offer. Though Jane has taken advantage of Bill's unfortunate plight, the only threat involved is Jane's refusal to enter into a contract other than at the lowball price that she's offered. In general, unless one party is responsible for the other party's desperate plight, that party's taking advantage of the desperation of the other party is an example of hard bargaining and not an improper threat.
All right. So duress, that's your remedy. Okay, that's your remedy for being able to have 1 foot in the system and 1 foot out of the system. Because if you have both feet out of the system, you may drown. Okay, so you need to be balanced. Have 1 foot in, 1 foot out, in order that you don't get knocked upside the head by these dumbass police officers who don't know anything, especially anything about citizenship or status or or your sovereign rights. So
what book was he getting those definitions out of?
What definition? Who getting that definition? Oh, he was getting that from the reinstatement of it's called the restatement, the second restatement of contracts. That's right. Second restatement of contracts. The rewriting. There's like a rewriting or philosophy of the contract law in 1979. It was written by one of the guys who wrote it was the guy the Corbin on Contracts, the book I told you guys to get, Corbin on Contracts. So Arthur Corbin was one of the guys who wrote the stipulations or the structure of how contracts would be considered nowadays. However, that doesn't necessarily wipe away the old way contracts were seen, which is why he's going back. He's giving you two breakdowns. He says the newer courts, and then he says the old way. So he's giving you both. Because remember, if it hasn't been enacted, if any judge hasn't taken up the restatement contracts in their one of their rulings, then it's still not law. It's more of a philosophy of how things should go, not necessarily exact law or what's called positive law.
So it's in theory.
Huh?
In theory.
Yes, it's more in theory. But it's also it's theory that's usually accepted as being correct. So when you got people like this creating shit like this, they're not just doing it to say it's theory. I mean, you got these big old super masons and super society cats coming together to create all this stuff. They're doing it at the behest of someone. Someone told them to do this, pretty much. So it's within their industry, within that system, it's going to be taken as real. Now, not if you understand the system, you don't if it's not enacted positively in law, you don't necessarily have to take it as truth. You can refute it or rebut it, which we're about to get into in a second. So legal presumptions. Okay, these are presumptions at law. Okay, so we're going to watch 2 quick videos on presumption. This is a shady lawyer trying to get you to sign up with him for traffic, but he breaking down presumption really quick though.
This is your Legal Minute with attorney Greg DeLeo.
A legal presumption is defined by the Louisiana Code of Evidence. Simply stated, it's a fact that the judge or jury in a case must find to be true unless the other party can show otherwise. When car accidents happen, there are some presumptions that help us figure out who's at fault. The most common one is the rear-end collision, where the following driver is automatically presumed to be at fault. Others are the right-of-way. If you have the right-of-way and someone on a side street collides with you, they are in the wrong. If a left-turning vehicle is involved in a collision, they are almost always at fault. The same is true of the vehicle that is changing lanes or backing up. Such a vehicle is presumed at fault in most cases, but those presumptions can be rebutted. Because legal fault is not always easy to determine, you should never admit fault at an accident scene. You could be wrong about being wrong.
All right, so he just said presumptions are rebuttable. Saw that, but see how he says that presumption will stand in law? It's presumed that this person was wrong. It's presumed that this person was at fault. So again.
In the law of evidence, a presumption of a particular fact can be made without the aid of proof in some situations. The types of presumption include a rebuttable discretionary presumption, a rebuttable mandatory presumption, and an irrebuttable or conclusive presumption. The invocation of a presumption shifts the burden of proof from one party to the opposing party in a court trial. Presumptions are sometimes categorized into 2 types: presumptions without basic facts, and presumptions with basic facts. In the United States, mandatory presumptions are impermissible in criminal cases, but permissible presumptions are allowed. The ancient Jewish law code, the Talmud, included reasoning from presumptions, hazaka, propositions taken to be true unless there was reason to believe otherwise, such as one does not ordinarily pay a debt before term. The same concept was found in ancient Roman law, where, for example, if there was doubt as to whether a child was really the issue of someone who had left money in a will, the presumption was in favor of the child. Medieval Roman and canon law graded presumptions according to strength, light, medium or probable, and violent. These gradings and many individual presumptions were taken over into English law in the 17th century by Edward Coke. There are 2 types of presumption: rebuttable presumption and conclusive presumption. An example of presumption without basic facts is presumption of innocence. An example of presumption with basic facts is declared death in absentia. For example, the law says if a person has been missing for 7 years or more, basic fact, that person is presumed dead.
All right. I don't know what the hell all that damn noise is on that shit, but
it was annoying as hell.
Yeah. So, in a presumption or presumptions are rebuttable or irrebuttable. So, meaning that an irrebuttable presumption means there's so many facts, or there's so much evidence, not facts, but there's so much evidence to prove that the assertion is true that they just won't rebut it. or in a rebuttable presumption will be something whereas it's just asserted, and until someone comes to challenge the assertion, that the first assertion will stand. Okay, so just look at the definite or the etymology of presumption. So the etymology of presumption is seizure and occupation without right, also taking upon oneself more than is warranted. Okay, that was what a presumption was, the etymology of it, or in the 13th century. Again, seizure and occupation without right, also taking upon oneself more than is warranted. Okay, this is what they're doing when you're walking up into court. Okay, confidence, audacity, a taking for granted, anticipation. Okay, and so to take is to take beforehand. So that's literally what presumption means, is to take initially. And then if I take that and then you say, give me that back, that's a rebuttable presumption. You say, hey, no, give me that back. Then you take it back. However, a presumption is me taking something from the get-go, just from the jump. So it can be taking of an idea, an assertion of, this is this, I thought this was this, and any one of those things. And until someone comes to refute that assertion or that presumption, it will stand in law no matter what. Okay, so why are we talking about that? Is because your documents, okay, when you're filling out your documents and you're claiming your aboriginal connection to the land, that's going to be a presumption. Okay, so you're gonna fill it with facts of how you're going to fill it with everything. So the presumption is also that the United States is a corporate. That's not really a presumption. That's more of a fact. But the presumption will be, because it's not, what's the term I'm looking for? It's not as easy to prove your connection to the landmass because they've hidden everything. So what you're going to do is you're going to claim your ancestry to the landmass, being the fact that the Olmecs were the first people here, or melanated people were the first people on this landmass, as well as with the fact that there were only about 500,000 slaves from Africa brought here. So a reasonable presumption would say that most melanated people here are not descendants of all Africans, that we had to be here first. So that's a presumption. You're going to presume that you're a descendant of one of those people who were here on the landmass before the Atlantic slave trade. So now, when you presume something, what that does is it leaves the burden of proof in the other person's hands. So once I make the presumption, then it's up to the other person to rebut the presumption, or else the presumption stands in law. So that's what you're going to do when you're writing your documents. You're going to say, I'm this, I'm Aboriginal, of the Haudenosaunee, I'm original connection to the landmass, and that's what I use. You don't necessarily have to use that. You can find, if you're able to find your actual Aboriginal ancestors to the land, then by all means throw that in there. But when you put all that in there and you say, well, I don't know if I can find, or if I know if I'm Native American or Aboriginal American, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, going through history, a reasonable person would say, or a reasonable presumption would be that because the Native American or the Aboriginal Americans or Africans were here before the Atlantic slave trade, that most of the people here on this landmass were descendants of those people first, and not of the Atlantic slave trade. That you are not indigenous, excuse me, you are Aboriginal to the landmass. Okay, and so you leave them 30 days, or you leave them however much time you want to refute your assertion or to rebut your assertion, your presumption. And if they don't, then it's acquiescence, the same way they do to you. It's acquiescence and tacit consent, which they will never do, because then they have to rebut all the points to your affidavit, okay? Which would mean they'd have to state that they have to show that they're not a corporation. They'd have to sit up here and they would have to refuse. So you bring that piece of paper. So you bring, you download, or you, not download, but you print out that the website or that page of the website that shows that they're United States of America, Inc. with their file, their Delaware corporate file number. And you put that in there, and then they actually have to show that they're not, that's not them. they have to come to court and say, hey, that's not me. Okay, we'll show that. That's not you? Okay, well, who is this? It says United States of America, Inc. You're the United States of America, right? The federal government is the United States of America, right? Okay, well then show me that that's not you. They will never do that, because then that would be exposing the game. So they'll let you slide all day long, as long as you're not, standing on top of the Empire State Building screaming how to get it done. As long as you're kind of moving through the system and subversively doing everything, you can do your thing. But if your presumption is faulty, or if you don't leave them time to answer your presumption, then it will never become law. You have to give them a certain amount of time to respond. 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is. I don't give them more than 30 days. Just like they give you. They give your ass 30 days to do some shit, and that's a wrap. So I did the same thing with them. 30 days, you have 30 days to respond to this affidavit and notice, or it becomes law. So this is why we got jumped on presumption, because now we're going to look at, going back to the affidavit. Actually, hold on. So the book, Eagles, Vultures and Eagles Clothing. This is their book. You guys need to get this book. Okay. This book has so much information in it. Okay. It has law cases, but it has the philosophy of law, and why certain things are the way they are, but also how they've corrupted the actual law. So it's going to give you a better base and understanding of of what you're getting into, the sovereign thing, or the self-governing movement, is what I like to call it. As well as going to give you a lot of different law cases and things to look at that you can go look up on your own so that you can learn. And you need to read those law cases. But it's going to give you the excerpt from the law case, but it'll actually give you where you can find the actual law case. And it's up to you to go look that law case up. And you should be using where you can, the free place where you can go look up law cases is, the one place I know is findlaw.com. So findlaw.com. Look those cases up. So this is Vultures and Eagles Clothing, but this is something on presumption from the book. Okay. Also, there is no law. Why, if there is no law, why do people go to jail? So all persons are presumed to know the law. If any person acts under any unconstitutional statute, he does so at his own peril. He must take the consequences. Okay, this is Amjur, 16 Amjur, 177, 178, pages 177, 178. So, presumption. The words presumption or presumed are derived from the federal rules of evidence. Where a conclusive presumption is intended in this, where a conclusive presumption is intended in this act, the word presumption is not used at all. The phrases such as red is green, or red is regarded to be green are used when statutory language is intended to command a court to follow a particular rule of law, regardless of the actual fact. It's presumed to be this until you rebut. And where's the second page? Oh, here it is. So, under the laws of commerce, truth is sovereign. So, commercial law is a war of truth, expressed in the form of an intellectual weapon called an affidavit. Okay, this is where your affidavit is going to give you power. An affidavit is merely a written list of facts or truths. These facts are presumed to be true until rebutted. Okay? These facts are presumed to be true until rebutted. That means proved to be false by counter evidence. It is survival of the fittest, where the last rebutted truth stands triumphant. Okay, that's literally what that means. If I assert a truth, if he rebuts that, then I assert another one. So it's back and forth. But they will never be able to resort to rebut your assertions in these affidavits. They can't, or it would be exposing themselves. And even if they did expose themselves, they still couldn't win, because then that would mean everything that you put in the affidavit is right. So that's how, this is where your connection is going to come to. So in the laws of commerce, the eternal and unchanging principles of law are: 1, in commerce, truth is sovereign. 2, truth is expressed in the form of an affidavit. Okay. 3, and we're going to look, I want somebody to, when I finish this, I want somebody to have affidavit on hand to read when I finish this. So truth is expressed in the form of an affidavit. 3, a matter must be expressed to be resolved. 4, an unrebutted affidavit stands as truth in commerce. Okay, an unrebutted affidavit. An unrebutted affidavit becomes a judgment in commerce. Okay, he who leaves the field of battle first does not respond to affidavit loses by default. Okay, so an example of that was when the judge, when the guy invoked common law jurisdiction in the court, and the judge says, we'll take a recess. And the guy says, the judge has abandoned ship. Okay, that's what he did, because he didn't know how to respond after dude invoked common law jurisdiction, because he's all admiralty. So once the dude invoked common law jurisdiction, he would have been at a loss. He'd have been like, oh shit, I don't know what to do now, because now that was on the record. The dude invoking common law jurisdiction was on the record. So he just couldn't proceed like he didn't do that. So now they have to follow through with that. And so that's why he got up and says, yo, recess. And the dude said, the judge has abandoned ship. And so which meant he was supposed to lose by default. 7, an affidavit of truth under commercial law can only be satisfied by a rebuttable affidavit of truth supported by evidence point for point. B, by payment. C, by agreement. D, by resolution by jury according to the rules of common law. So this is very important right here. An affidavit of truth. What is your main affidavit? It's the affidavit of truth and status, right? That is your main affidavit. Under commercial law can only be satisfied by a rebuttal affidavit of truth supported by evidence point for point. Now, do you see why I had all that shit in my affidavit? Every single thing I had in there, they have to counter each single one. Every law case, every statutory law I put in there, every maxim of law, all of that has to be refuted point by point. They ain't gonna go through all that and do that shit. First of all, they have to read all the books I read just to even understand what the hell I said. So this is why your paperwork, this is why they call it paperwork terrorism. Because you're throwing so much shit at them that they can't swim through it. The same shit they do to you, but you're just doing it on a more massive scale than what they do, because you're going to be so versed in the many different forms of the law of how they trap you. You're going to send it all right back at them. It's Tai Chi. You accept it, then you gather the energy and send his own energy right back at him. So number 8, a workman is worthy of his hire, and 9, all are equal under the law. Okay. So we're going to go, last time we were going over this, we're going over my court case that I sent to you guys, and we were going over the points or statement, the memorandum of points. So we went over, let's see. So just quick, remember the first part was my declaration of status and rights, because you're not going to submit your affidavit. Your affidavit, again, is only in support of your assertions within your court case document. Okay, you're saying everything you need to say within the court case document and supported by affidavits. So these are all my points. So my points are, I have 3 points. They didn't have jurisdiction over me. 2, statement of a claim upon which relief can be granted. And 3, the third point was service of process was defective. So first parts of my points, and I keep on going. Declaration, this is my declaration of status right off the bat. Meaning how you do not have jurisdiction over me. So this is my presumption. They have to rebut every single point in here that I make. They have to refute that the United States is a corporation. They have to refute that minority does not mean infancy. All of these things that I put in here, every single one, they have to refute it or rebut it. Declaration continued. This is who I am. This right here is my neutrality declaration. I'm a neutral. I'm opposed to war in any form. So don't call me an insurgent, enemy combatant, a terrorist, or any of that bullshit. I've already told you I don't war. That's not what I'm doing. I'm only letting you know I'm not with your game anymore, or I'm repositioning myself on the chessboard. So 6, the accused. So this is my denial of the straw man. Number 6 is my denial of the straw man. As you can see, I deny any form of this capital corporate name: Kevin Luttrell, Kevin Barringer, Kevin L. Blah blah blah. So this is. So statement of facts, memorandum of points. So this is my point 1. So the first part was just a declaration, actually, of my status, of who I am, letting them know why I don't have jurisdiction. Or was letting them know who I am, my status of who I am. Now the first point speaks to the point of why they don't have jurisdiction. Okay, so this goes all the way through point 1, point A, to point 1, point 1A. Point 1B, point 1C. Oh, point 1B? Yeah. So point 1A, point 1B. This is point 1B was. So how I don't have to come into court, how I don't have to walk my physical body into court. Okay, stating everything. So then, well, you didn't show up to court. So you're. This is what they'll say. Well, you didn't show up to court. That's a violation. And now the case is going. They'll send your case to what's the word? Warrant. So your case will now go move into warrant. So because you don't show your physical body or you don't appear in court, so your appearance moves to warrant. This is your statement of why you don't have to physically be in court. Now I'm just showing you how you're going to point it out. So this is dealing with all these different points. We went over these pages last time, which is why I'm not going in depth today. I'll get into the other stuff in a second. So point 1D, Supreme Court of the United States have held. This is my rights as far as or states' rights against the people, sovereign rights. Also going down through California. So my sovereign rights are also mentioned within California courts or California law. Then this is where we left off. So point 2. Plaintiff has failed to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. Okay, on the following grounds. The accused has expressly retained all rights to travel freely and to carry on his private affairs within the de jure California Republic and the United States of America. See how I put, there's a lowercase u on the United States of America? And, unincorporated by the corporate state of California. Unencumbered by the corporate state of California. The accused does not drive, okay, which engage in commerce along the highway, show them where they can find that, and is therefore not obligated, California Civil Codes, where they can find that, or subject to the provisions of the driver's license compact/contract. Anybody with your law dictionary look up compact?
You told us to look up affidavit.
Oh, I did. Actually, I sure did. Actually, before we get in here, affidavit, really quick. Somebody read affidavit for me.
All right. A written or printed declaration or statement of facts made voluntary and confirmed by the oath or affirmation of the party making it, taken before an officer having authority to administer such oath. A statement or declaration reduced to writing and sworn to or affirmed before some officer who has authority to administer an oath or affirmation. And then there's some little words under that.
That's why an affidavit is taken to be true. See, it's when you go in and you get it notarized, it's stamped, boom, everything is prima facie as it says. So when you submit that in the court will take it to be true until the other party who's the adversarial party within the contract or within your affidavit comes to rebut it. If they don't, it stands, because an affidavit is taken to be true, because it's everything when you submit your affidavit, everything should be properly placed out as far as, or procedurally stuck to. So, and you have to get that notarized. You want to get it notarized, because the notarized is a third party stating that it's not just you saying, well, this is who I am. It's a third party verification is what a notary usually is. So you third party verify it, you send it to court, and now this is a legal presumption of truth until someone refutes the truth or refutes the assertion. And so compact, somebody look up compact.
Yeah, I got it.
Go ahead.
An agreement, a contract, usually applied to conventions between nations or sovereign states.
Okay, say that one more time. Read that for me again.
An agreement, a contract, usually applied to conventions between nations or sovereign states.
Keep going.
A contract between parties which creates obligations and rights capable of being enforced and contemplated as such between the parties and their distinct and independent characters. A mutual consent of parties concerned respecting some property or the right that is to the object of the stipulation, or something that is to be done or forborne. Compact.
There you go. So compact, contract, same thing. This is what they used to call it. Okay. This is what it's called now. So these are my laws where you can find what I was asserting as far as the driver's license contract. And so California Vehicle Code, bam, bam, bam. These are so you guys will have to find the equivalent in your codes. So let's read. So again, the accused does not drive, engage in commerce along the highway, Black's Law 4, and is therefore not obligated or subject to the provisions of the driver's license compact contract, making the accused liable to penalties governing said instrument. Okay, see attached affidavit of right to travel. So 2B, in brief. And so these are And so this is really quick. I just gave them a couple of court cases, law court cases to support. Remember, you're in common law. So your whatever you're asserting needs to be backed up by law cases. Okay, that's important. If you don't have any law cases backing up what the hell you're saying, it's not common law. So again, the right to travel upon the highways and to transport his or her property thereon, either by carriage or automobile, is not a mere privilege, which a city may prohibit or permit at will, but a common right, which he/she has under the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Okay, that's Thompson versus Smith. That's the main that's your main travel thing there. Also, the right to travel is part of liberty, which the citizen cannot be deprived without due process of law. Now, this term liberty is tricky, but not if you have the correct status. All right. So these are two more law cases that I put in here. So then I move to, and so then at the bottom here, I put in another law case for them to look up. This is the California Appellate Court. But then also it says additional cases to support continued in affidavit of right to travel. Okay, so if you need some more, bam, it's right there. So that's why plaintiff, so going back to point 2, failure of plaintiff to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. I can't grant you any relief as far as this is a speeding ticket because I'm not obligated to follow those laws. So there can be no relief from me. I never agreed to be bound by those terms of the policy. So how can I grant you relief when there was no promise? And here we go to contract. There was no promise by me to perform or consideration. That wasn't there. So I can't give you any relief as far as contractually because there was no promise there. And then service of process, service of process on accused is defective and incomplete on the following grounds. Okay, so there are certain laws that state when you're a foreign entity that they have to serve, the Secretary of State has to be notified in order to serve you service of process for any law case. So the jurisdiction of the person is obtained by jurisdiction of the person is obtained by the legal service of a valid process issued out of a court of competent jurisdiction. Okay? So again, remember they're serving process on you, meaning they're serving process, meaning they're charging you or service of process, meaning that you have they're charging you with something in court. Meaning they have jurisdiction over you, they're ordering you to court for a charge. So jurisdiction of the person is obtained by the legal service of a valid process issued out of a court of competent jurisdiction. So what am I stating right there? Can anybody hit that really quick? Why in that line in 3A, why would their service of process be defective going off of the line of 3A? Anyone? Don't all speak at once. All right, nobody? All right. Look, you guys, if y'all gonna be self-governing, y'all can't be having the meek voices. Y'all got
no court of competent jurisdiction.
There you go. Thank you. They don't. What was my first assertion in the whole goddamn thing?
They didn't have jurisdiction.
Bam.
I finally got my mic fixed. I was the one that was causing the audio problems, so I had to log out several times.
Okay. So now that hit it right on the head. Hit the nail right on the head. They don't have service of process was defective because, again, jurisdiction of the person is obtained by the legal service of a valid process issued out of a court of competent jurisdiction. All right? They don't have competent jurisdiction because I've already asserted that you don't have jurisdiction over me, over my person. So you can't serve process over me if you don't have jurisdiction to serve process. Bam. the service of process is defective. As well, 3B, California Vehicle Code, service of process, a non-resident. So a service of process on a non-resident shall be made by leaving one copy of the summons and complaint in the hands of the director or, director, which is Secretary of State, of the director or in his office at Sacramento, or by mailing either by certified or registered mail address only, return receipt requested, the copy of the summons and complaint to the office of the director in Sacramento. Okay, so when I became a non-resident alien alien to me, and I alerted them in the court, then once that became public record, because remember your filings in court are public record. Once that became public record, they had an obligation to notify me through the Secretary of State in order for me to be cognizable, damn, I can't even say the word. In order for me to take cognizance or awareness of their process, they would have had to serve it to the Secretary of State. Okay, and so they didn't do that. Because they didn't do that, then that's the other part of why their service of process was ineffective. First part though is the court had no jurisdiction. It's not a court of competent jurisdiction because I'm not within their jurisdiction. Okay. And we're not gonna get through all this tonight. This is the last page I'm gonna go over, and then we'll get through the other stuff tomorrow. And so this is 3C. So as you notice, I'm going through all things in here. So we're going to get into this probably a little bit later, but this is the oath of office. And every judge takes an oath of office, and you want to expressly accept their oath of office, because then it would be to you as the sovereign citizen who gave power to the Constitution. Okay, you always remember, the power is always within you. The Constitution only protects your rights. It doesn't give you rights. So 3C, as stated, accused is a non-resident, and that's my code. That's the vehicle code where you can find it, to the aforesaid state of California, and has not violated nor injured any person or their property, and therefore cannot grant relief to a non-injured party. Okay, common law. You have to have injured parties in common law for there to be any wrongdoing within common law. A corporate entity, whether it be city, state, or U.S. government, cannot testify as an injured party, thus be cross-examined as an individual. Thus be cross-examined. As an individual, one can speak for a corporation, but cannot be an injured party. Cannot be an injured party as a living person of record. And this is within this code here that I found that. So you guys have to find, remember, you guys have to find equivalent stuff within your state. Every state has these. This is why they're uniform codes.
Okay, just to clarify that section there, that's also why you can't use an attorney, because an attorney would be representing you, and it would allow them to use an attorney to represent them.
Well, if I get an attorney, that would be me submitting to the jurisdiction of the court, because an attorney is an officer of the court. So its first duty is to the court. So by you obtaining an attorney, immediately you've already submitted to the jurisdiction of the court right off the bat. You can't claim the court doesn't have jurisdiction because you've already submitted to the jurisdiction by obtaining as an attorney. So that's why you don't. Then so down here, 3D. This is in California jurisprudence. So part 1, courts. Damn, I had a whole damn gang of law in this damn thing, didn't I? All right, so California jurisprudence.
Showing off, my man.
I ain't showing off. I'm just, I mean, I haven't read this thing probably 10, 15, 12 years since I sent it in. So, or in full, I haven't read it in full in that long. So part 1, courts, 100 reads in part. Jurisdiction in a case cannot be obtained over one who is forcibly brought within the territorial limits of the court. Okay? They cannot assume jurisdiction. This is why I can't grant you relief upon, service of process. Service of process is defective, okay, because of the jurisdiction of the court. So these were 4 things of why the court doesn't have jurisdiction or why their service of process on me was ineffective. Okay, and the last thing we're going to get onto is the oath of office. So let it be known that the accused expects any and all judicial officers to have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution for the United States of America. Constitution is and I gave the article. And I accept this oath thereunto. Okay, now you've made that oath to me. Now you're in court for me. You're in there for my benefit. Now that I've expressly accepted your oath to the Constitution, you're on that bench for me. Okay. I also expect such judicial officers' compensation for their services to be in gold and or silver coin from the Constitution. And this case here, Calder and wife versus Bull and wife. And that's a Supreme Court case. And not to have been diminished in any way, meaning their compensation, not to have diminished in any way, which is Article 3. So this is called having an Article 3 judge. I don't know if you guys can look that up on YouTube, but a lot of people go in there and say, I want an Article 3 judge. What does that mean? So in the article, it states that the compensation, that a judge shall receive compensation for their services, which shall not have been diminished in any way. So being that in the Constitution, legal tender is gold or silver. If a judge is not paid in gold or silver, he's not legal. This judge is not a legal judge, or he's not a third article judge. As well, in the article, it states that their compensation shall have not been diminished. If a judge pays taxes in any way, as we're about to get into, so their compensation has been diminished, and that would make them not a third article judge. So again, I also expect such judicial officers' compensation for their services to be in gold and or silver coin and not to have been diminished in any way. This includes, but is not limited to, see, remember, includes usually means only this. So I have to put not limited to. So this includes, but is not limited to, paying income taxes, interest on the federal debt. And this is where I put the code where you can find that, as well as Eisner versus Macomber case, Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust, all these different cases that support what I'm saying there. So this includes, but is not limited to, paying income taxes to/for the Incorporated United States of America, Delaware Corporation, file number, bam, 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 bam. Okay, so I've accepted their oath to office, and I need, in order for you to even have any type of, for you to be a legal judge, to be able to even see this case, you have to be what's called a third article judge, paid in gold or silver for your services or compensation, and not have any of that taken out for taxes. Okay, then that would make you not a third article judge. All right, any questions?
A whole lot.
Yeah, so that last section, the last paragraph, I get with the oath of office, I get that you want to accept the oath of office because that way you're having a real judge instead of an administrator. This second paragraph is, I guess, just reinforcing that the judge is is a judge and not an administrator.
What do you mean?
Like traffic court and all those people, they're not judges. They administrate the rules and statutes. Versus
yes.
like being in front of a jury of your peers and stuff like that.
Yes. Well, but so you're right. But what's your question on the?
I'm just trying to really making sure that I understand why I have that paragraph there. What?
Let me. So which one of the two? The 3D?
Oh, the second one.
Oh, the oath of office. Okay.
Yeah. In the oath of office, the second one saying, okay, I want to make sure the judge has been paid in gold and silver and everything, which means that they're an Article 3 judge.
So really quick, let me read Article 3 so you guys understand why that has power. All right. So if you got your Constitution, you should be reading right along.
Basically, dollar bills are fiat currency, and the only real money is gold and silver coinage.
Well, sort of. That's the back end of it, but you need to know why first. So, organization Article 4, where is it?
I mean, I can start reading if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Knock it out.
Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution for the United States Republic. Section 1, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Now, let me read that over. I said it wrong. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges both of the Supreme and inferior court shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office, as he said.
So, if a judge pays taxes, his compensation is diminished, and he's not a third article judge or a constitutional judge, and you can have him recused. That's how. But you have to assert that first. Like, you have to ask the judge, do you pay taxes? You pay taxes, then you're not a third article judge, homie. So your compensation is diminished. And
oh, word, you a lawyer? Oh yeah, you took the title of nobility. Sorry, you gotta get out of here.
So that's why. And the reason, so again, man, when you're dealing with the law, just like they did with you, man, you want to throw everything at them. The kitchen sink, the Volvo in the garage, you want the sprinklers, you want to throw everything at these motherfuckers to make sure that they can't come back at you. They have to fight through all of that, all of it, in order to come and get you. Okay? So you won't, whatever and again, I don't like to use the term. They've coined the term for us, paper terrorism. However, I call it, just paper storming them. They call it paper terrorism. I call it paper storm. So you literally send a goddamn hurricane of paperwork at their ass. Like, look, figure it out. Just like you do with everybody else who you think don't know the law. Okay, well, here's somebody who actually knows more law than you, and you motherfuckers figure it out. See, they always assume that no one knows more law than them, or they can put together some shit as intricate and deep that they have to get through the webs of and fight through. This is what you're doing. You're sending all this shit at them, and they can't fight through it because in doing so, they would have to expose themselves. So that shit fall through. Like, again,
okay, well then, slightly unrelated with the vultures and eagles clothing. Are you going to go into what Lynn Meredith did wrong? Like, it seems to me when I was looking at that and all this other stuff that I'm finding, it seems like the government throws the book at people that are telling people about taxes. So it's almost like if
Meredith, back in the day, Lynn, she didn't have the actual in here. She doesn't have the the actual corporate file number of the IRS. She doesn't have that. This is an old book that you're dealing with. So this is way before the internet. So people were only able to understand and find that the IRS was a Delaware corporation with the internet. Other than that, you had no idea. And I learned that. I learned this from, funny enough, it was Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory used to have a website. His dickgregory.com, and on his website, he had the file numbers of all the government agencies. I'm like, what? I'm like, wait a minute. I'm looking at this like, yeah, it's like United States of America, this file number, IRS, blah, this file number. I was like, that can't be true. I was like, get the fuck out of here. So he had Delaware, this and that. So I went right to the Delaware site. I'm searching all the way through it. Saw corporate entities. Went to their entity search and looked it up and found every single government agency he had on there. So she, dealing with her, I didn't see any of that in her book. She didn't have any of that type of stuff. So when you're dealing with corporations, you have to have the actual face. This is the law. You can't come in and philosophically put a face on somebody and say, oh, they're a corporation. Well, how are they? Are they really a corporation? Are they? Show me. Okay.
But it almost seems like if you're going to talk about this, it's better to have a corporation in their game and just operate it the best way you can in commerce, and you could do like Trump and pay no taxes.
You could. That's true. Like how Trump said, I use the tax laws perfectly, bitches. that's what he said this week. He's like, y'all be hating on me, nigga, because I ain't pay no taxes. Y'all dumbass motherfuckers paying taxes. That ain't my fault that y'all stupid. But what this is though is well, first of all, you understand that the IRS supposedly gets its power from the Department of Treasury, right?
Right.
It's supposed to be a division of the Department of Treasury. That falls to the wayside when you pull up the Delaware corporation numbers of the U.S. Treasury.inc. So when you pull up both of their treasury, you pull up both of their Delaware file and corporation numbers, put them both together. So now they're both corporations. Okay. Well, if the IRS is a department of the Treasury, then the Treasury is a corporation. Then it's a corporation, but it's also a corporation because it also has a file number. Put those two together, then they can't refute any of that. Most of these, what a lot of these people do is they can't find the actual fact that how they're being manipulated by a corporation. So it's always going off the assumption that you're dealing with government, that you're dealing with a governmental power. If they understood, and she does, and in the book a lot, she has a lot of it in there. But you have to have the actual face of the corporation if you're going to fight the corporation or dispute the corporation. That's just law. I can't dispute you if I don't know who you are in law. Like I can be fighting, I can be swinging in shadows and ghosts. I need to know who I'm fighting, and so that's the legal entity of where that legal entity can actually be found in law in order for you to refute it. Any other questions? Anyone?
Yep. I mean, if anybody want to go before me, because mine is pretty long-winded.
Yours is pretty long-winded, is it?
Yeah, I know you were going to get into the whole astrology stuff, so I'm waiting for you.
He said, "No, we're not. We ain't getting into the astrology stuff. That's another thing. This is about law. However, universal law, you definitely need to understand universal law and how energies move in order to understand this law, because this law was created off of that. If you don't understand that, you will always be at a loss. That's just how it is. These people who create these laws are secret society cats who come together in their lodges and all this stuff and read all this esoteric information and about energies and and the stars and movement and all that. And they come together and form these systems out of that, because that's the higher system. That's why in the Kabbalion, it's as above, so below. Systems are the same. So, as the system works out in the universe, we just mimic that system. within our own minor universe or micro universe. And so unless you understand this is how energies move, or unless you understand how energies move, and the way that they've created the system off of that, then you will always be at a loss within the system. You'll never fully grasp what they're doing. Just like how Washington, D.C. is laid out according to astrology. It's all of it is mapped out according to astrology, down to the last inch. You know what I'm saying? It's all stars and lined up with the solstice. The obelisk is lined up with the solstice. And I mean, it's crazy.
I don't deny any of that. And I don't deny physics, that everything is matter and energy. I'm just dispute that it has any relevance to behavior. It has not been proven. It's been disproven scientifically.
Of course
to have any relevance.
Of course it has.
No, Kev, let him refute it. Let him show evidence to what he's saying.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
I guess that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for evidence that anybody should.
Oh, you don't have evidence.
What's that?
No, wait a minute. So let's go back. So you're saying that it hasn't been proven by.
No. What I'm saying is I'm just humbly asking for any evidence that it has relevance to. We all know that there's an incentive, and historically people have used religion. Just from you ran Zoe's show on Monday about how conscious people use religion to manipulate people, and people are so anti-intellectual that they were never taught critical thinking. Right. So they don't even, so they believe all these things that are just not correct, because they don't even know how to think correctly. Not what to think, but how to have a good thought. What is good thinking? So one of the things that have been used throughout history is the spiritual people have said anything that was unknown, it was God. That was the bucket that everything unknown was placed in until people had better understanding. They said, oh, the moon disappeared, the sun disappeared, and until they finally understood what an eclipse was.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So what I'm saying is people, through understanding the scientific method, which is you come up with a theory, then you state what must happen for that theory to be correct, then you look for evidence of it. If you don't see you dismiss that theory, no matter how beautiful the theory is.
But that's how astrology was created. Astrology was created. First of all, you have everything. Everything is energy and matter and energy and vibration. Every piece of matter vibrates.
Agreed.
Creates a
That's
magnetic
basic physics.
Right.
Yep.
Which creates a magnetic field. Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So all these magnetic fields are interacting with each other. Okay. Do you understand that, right?
I agreed.
Okay, just as the way the moon affects the tides on the moon way out there affects the water here. Now that one scientific rule, you can extrapolate that to everything. Okay, because if that one body affects something here like that, then that means it would affect all bodies of energy. Now, just because the energy is subtle, the way it affects you is subtle, that you don't understand it, doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you. So what they did with astrology is astrology was created by observation. That's it. They noticed the stars, and they noticed the stars in a certain position in the sky. And people, when they manifested, when these stars were in this position, they all acted like a certain way. They was like, okay, well, when the stars are like this, you guys act like that. All right, and then the stars move and change position, or actually we move because we're the one that's moving around this. Around the solar system or around the galaxy. So when we move to a different position and we see another star. When we move to that different position, people born, when we see this position of stars, they act like this. And so it's just a body of observation that was created over thousands of years. And so this is where you get it from.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but science has a basic thing of teaching correlation is not causation. Because two things happen together, it has no bearing that one caused the other. Okay. And that's one thing that people miss, and I understand why people do it, but they just automatically say, oh, this happened together, so it caused it. Or I was born in a particular month, so that has some bearing on something going on.
But that's not that you're talking about one instant. This was gathered over thousands of years. Just like if you have experimentation in science at a certain time, when we do a certain experiments and they come out to a certain result, we say, okay, this is the result. This is what this is, until somebody comes up and refute it. It's the same thing with astrology. They didn't just say one person was born, they looked at the stars. Dude, you're talking about many people who are born when the stars are act like this, they all act the same. Okay, man, that's crazy. All right, then the positions move. Then everybody who's born when the stars are like this, oh, you kind of act similar. That's kind of weird. All right, so on and so forth. So once you have all those correlating evidence, it doesn't become causation. It doesn't become what you're talking about, speculation anymore. It becomes cause and effect. Okay, when does it becomes that at a certain point?
Okay, so Zoe talked directly about a fallacy that people engage in, that because people believe in a ghost, those are the people that believe in possession.
Right, you're saying, yeah, you're the what the thinker thinks to prove or approve.
Right, so maybe that's the same thing with astrology. If you think that it has some bearing on you, then you'll make it correct. You'll say, oh yeah, based on this month. And there's all these things of disproving it, the Forer effect, the subjective validation. It's like where they tested people and said, hey, your personality means X, Y, and Z based on this. And people reacted to it, but they just made up the things that they were saying about them. It's like if I say, oh, Brother Kevin, you're going to come into some money. It's like, that's not specific. Okay, I found a penny on the floor. I guess it's true.
Well, no, that's what you're talking about prophecy and just the way people act. Now, some people, people can lie, but the thing is, astrology is not monolithic. You can't judge astrology by looking at one sign. It's a science. Astrology was the science before astronomy. It literally, astronomy came after. The study of this, the watching of the stars, the study of the energy of the movement of the planets came first. And astronomy came after. Do your study. Just like alchemy and chemistry are the same thing. Alchemy is the science of the energy of matter, whereas chemistry deals with the substance of the substance of matter. So it's these things came first, and all what you're talking about now as science came after. This stuff didn't come. What we're talking about didn't come after this stuff. So,
right, but that stuff wasn't. It was an improvement upon. Before, people thought that the Earth was flat, and all the
scientists. No, they didn't. They didn't. You're talking about a certain people in Europe, and they didn't even believe that the world was flat. You're talking about misinformation now. What you're talking about when the people believed the world was flat was some bullshit. That was what they projected to the masses so that they can control the masses. However, they've had history and artifacts going back far beyond that, where ancients like the people in Sumeria had depictions of the planets being round, and all 7 planets, and how the sizes and colors and all of it. So that's been around for much longer than the world being flat, and they knew that science was already out there. It depends on where your information is coming from.
Oh, okay. Well, all that someone has to do is just Google astrology debunked, and they'll see all these logical problems with horoscopes and astrology from the standpoint of astrology was based on when the Earth was believed to be the center of the universe, or why are people born on the same day so different if astrology was relevant.
Because astrology, again, is not monolithic. If you can be born on the same day as me, which would be our sun signs, but our moon signs can be completely different. And so if you're an emotional person and I'm not an emotional person, which is how your moon signs manifest, you could act like a completely different person than me, especially if we're in an emotional state, which is why I'm saying it's a science. What you're dealing with is you have to study it like a science. It's not just some, hey, your sign is this and you're like that. That's not astrology. That's bullshit. Astrology is a main science. There's different aspects, just like one part of you. If you got angry at one point in time because of something, I can't extrapolate that to who you are totally. I can this nigga's an angry motherfucker. You just been angry in that position right there or at that moment. then that doesn't encompass the total things that you are. Just like a sun sign doesn't encompass the total thing that a person is as far as astrology. You have to really do the study on that. But again, that's for personal, that's for personal interest. If if eventually you're able to jump on that and you see value in studying it, then do so. You'll start to see how all of it is different and how actually all of it applies, as well as how all the ancients used to use this, as well as the leaders of the world today use it. I already told you.
Right. The ancients used to drain blood like the Aztecs did, but people used to use chicken entrails to predict what's going on.
Was that? But first of all, the Aztecs drained blood. They didn't drain. It was all that was about astrology. The Mayan, first of all, the Aztecs got it from the Mayans, and the Mayans did it according to the calendar, the celestial calendar, when all the planets, when there was a galactic alignment. So you have basketball, and I'm gonna leave after this because I got food on the way. But after basketball was created by the
I didn't get my question in though.
All right, well,
you sure it's the right pizza too?
No, this is a burger. This is a hamburger. So when the Olmecs bought over the rubber tree, this is when the descendants, their Mayans, created balls from the rubber, the sap, right? So they created the game where you had to knock the ball through the stone circle against the wall, only using your body, which was the precursor to basketball and soccer. So the winner, the person who would win by knocking the ball through the circle, would be the one to be sacrificed, because it was prestigious to win, because you were transitioning to transitioning during the galactic alignment. That ball going through the hole represented the whole galactic alignment that just happened in like 2012, which is scientific, where all the planets aligned with the center sun of the galaxy. All the planets and the sun aligned in one. So when that happened, that meant a new energy was coming about of the galaxy. And so when they understood that, and so that game represented the transitioning of your energy or moving to a higher consciousness. So being killed was actually prestigious. They wasn't like they were sacrificing people. The person who died actually wanted to do that. See, you're just talking about a different time though. That's a whole completely different time. But today, all I'm saying is I don't have time to sit and explain the whole body of astrology to you and try to make you convince it. That's not what I do. All I'm saying is you act like your sign, whether you know it or not, and whether you believe it or not. That's just the way it is. I walked up to
but that's selective.
It ain't selective. I walked up to a chick the other day and I was talking to her, and she in the store. She was the checkout chick at the store. I said, we were talking. She was cool. I said, "You a Gemini, huh?" She said, "How'd you know that?"
Right. But the descriptions are so broad.
They're not. They're not.
All I'm saying, there's a whole bunch of scientists, astronomers that even debunk astrology by saying, they don't
debunk it. They debunked they're only debunking the certain points that they're trying to jump on. But I can come back and rebunk it. They debunk it, and I can come back and break their whole shit down and show you how it's actually true.
Okay, so Phil Plait, an astronomer, this is directly from Astrology and Horoscopes Debunked, says there's harm in astrology. It weakens people's ability to rationally look at the world, an ability that we need now more than ever. Study after study has shown that claims and predictions made by astrologers have no merit. They're indistinguishable from chance, which means astrologers cannot claim to have some ability to predict anyone's life path or destiny.
Well, first of all, I don't use astrology for predictions. That's not what astrology is for. Astrology is to understand energy. So that's not really what astrology is about. Astrology is the study of the stars. That's all it is. Just like astronomy. Astronomy is not really the study of the stars. Astrology is the study of the stars. Ology means the study of. Onomy means to watch. You're just looking at the stars. So astrology is really the study of the stars. Astronomy is just to look at them. So which is why astrology came first. So again, going back.
Right, but one is considered the true science, the same way psychiatry versus psychology.
Yeah.
The psychiatrist is the actual doctor. The psychologist is the one that sits and listens to people talk.
Okay, but who considers it the science? The astrology was the actual science before they created astronomy, just the watching of the stars, because they understood that to understand the movement and energy of the stars was to give the people power. So they had to separate you from that, and that's what only the elite use. The elite uses that form of doctrine, while they give you the bullshit, so that you have
right. But the people that are sending stuff into space are not astrologers. They're astronomers.
Well, they're different things. They're all different types of names of what they are. Astronomy, though, means to watch the stars. They're not astronomers. The astronomy means to watch the stars, to look at the stars. It doesn't mean the study of the stars, which is what astrology is. Look at what look at what ology means, the breakdown of the two words. But again, going back, I'm just putting this on you. Elite people use astrology, just as we talked about J.P. Morgan. Billionaires use astrologers. Millionaires use consultants. Why do you think that?
There's plenty of elite people that do foolish things. Steve Jobs didn't take medicine and use some holistic stuff, and that's why he's dead.
That's not why he's dead.
It was too late for him to actually use conventional medicine.
It's your own thing. You said about the correlation. Just because evidence shows to one thing doesn't mean that's the cause of the outcome.
Right. That's my point. Just because somebody is smart in one area, that still doesn't say anything about that.
Where did you go to college at, bro?
What's that?
Where did you go to college?
Yale.
And that is the number one problem.
Because
that's not a problem.
Why? Because I'm told to use my mind. I'm told to lead and not follow.
That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about in the slightest.
No,
I don't understand.
What he's saying is usually a formal education. Because formal education was created to dumb you down. Actually, or mainstream education was created to dumb you down, so that you couldn't be a productive part of the masses or the part of the elite masses. And so if you actually got there by some other way, then fine. But they weren't trying to make you get there. As far as
there's secret societies all in where there's private eating clubs, and you're told about dominating the world in some capacity.
Skull and Bones, right at Yale. I know about
right. But it's also told like we're telling everybody this foolishness to keep them confused.
No, they tell
kind of a thing.
The foolishness they're telling you is the other bullshit that doesn't use that. Just like as in Christianity, meditation was in the Bible first before prayer, and they took out meditation because meditation focused you inward, whereas prayer focuses your energy outward. You understand what they're doing, man? You have the elite, and then you have the masses as cattle, which they need to control. And they can't control you, so they make you control yourself by feeding you bullshit information. If you had the information of how to guide yourself through this by understanding energies, would you really need them? No. If you understood how to run shit like they do, would you need them? No. So they have to give you bullshit first. So again, the elite, I'm just gonna keep going back to how the elite, everybody who's running this shit, is using astrology. You think they're not, but they are. That's just how it is, dude. Why is Washington, D.C. laid out according to astrology? Why is that? If it means nothing, why did they do that?
No. I'm not saying that it doesn't mean nothing. I believe that people see beauty in nature. That's why they're fractal. And the perfect form is a mathematical form. So whether you use the golden ratio or whatever, so I can appreciate how something's designed to look beautiful based on the number 12, which is significant because it can be divided.
They didn't design it to make it look beautiful. That was an ancillary part of it. They designed it though so that it lined up with certain celestial bodies in the galaxy. It had nothing to do with looking good. That's great that it looks good as far as that. And of course that was a part of it, aesthetics, but that's not what it's for. The sun and the obelisk lining up perfectly, that ain't got nothing to do with aesthetics. That's some energy. The sun has energy. Do we agree with that?
Yeah, it has energy, but the planets, even the planets that are named, it's arbitrary.
What are you talking about?
All of the traditional planets that we have are named after Roman gods.
Okay.
So
the planet names don't mean anything. It's still a big ass body in the sky with electromagnetic field moving around with its electromagnetic fields affecting other electromagnetic fields. That's
right, but some people believe because Venus is the goddess of love, that has some sway over relationships in some way.
It doesn't have sway over relationships. All it does is mean if you have, and I'm going to get into astrology right now. It doesn't have sway over relationships. All it does, it means that it has a certain energy involved in the relationship. So let's say somebody you met had a sun sign that was in your Venus sign. All that would mean is that you would have a connection to that person. You would feel an affinity towards them. That don't mean that you would fall in love with them and fucking be all and be all fucking encompassed by that person. And all that means is you would feel a certain connection and energy to that person. Whereas Venus is the goddess of love. So just on a minor scale, it doesn't mean you're going to fall in love with somebody that you meet immediately. All that means is that you were like, dang, this person is real cool. Or, damn, I really like that person. That's all it means. Is explore that energy more.
Don't you find that a lot of it falls to a logical fallacy of the appeal to a tradition? Just because a lot of people practice something like astrology, it says nothing about it being viable. Just because a lot of people believe something, it doesn't say anything about the fact of that something. Like, for example, people believe that the Black Plague was caused by, like, demons caused it. Just because of the number of people that believed it said nothing about what actually caused it.
Nothing to do with astrology, dude. It is proven. Planets have electromagnetic fields. They're big gravitational bodies which affect the other bodies, which is why you don't see them crashing into each other, because their electromagnetic fields are bouncing and rolling off of each other. Same way we do. Dude, they have electromagnetic fields, so do we. Those things interact. If the moon can affect it all the way down here, the moon all the way up there affects the water down here, why don't you think the other planets have any effect on you? That's science.
So if there is a force that could possibly affect us here on Earth the way that astrologers can't claim,
we lost David.
Then the asteroids, extrasolar planets would totally overwhelm nearby planets.
But, I mean, dude, first of all, you've heard of something called a lunatic.
Okay, yep.
Okay.
I guess the etymology is the moon.
Yes. The moon,
okay.
Moon affects the... Where do you think that come from?
People in the past saying the moon has some impact on a person.
And lunatic is a legal word. So if that wasn't actual science, why would that be a legal word?
Okay, that goes just to what I was saying about appeal to tradition. Just because a lot of people do something doesn't say it's viable, doesn't say it's correct.
But there's major evidence over the countless years that astrology is factual, because first of all, and even in science now, they're starting to prove that that stuff is factual. You just need to do the study. All you're doing is you don't have information on one side. You don't even have information on both sides. All you're doing, you're trying to play the devil's advocate and talk without having information. Do the study yourself and then answer your own questions. So you're always going to be able to rebut your own and refute your own thing, because you don't have actual information in either one. So go do the study on both, of the science of it and then the astrology, the astrology aspect of it, and then get your own conclusions instead of just always asking questions and not knowing fully and refuting everything somebody else says about it. Because I know it's true for me. I've broken down many things, and I do it on a daily basis. I train my clients according to their signs. They don't know that. I ask them their sign off the bat, but then if it's a Pisces, I'll
splash water on them.
No, I'll encourage that person more. If it's a fire sign, I'll challenge that person more. If it's an earth sign, we'll get more physical. And it's all within their energy. They all love the same thing. So again, this information is for you to understand yourself. I'm not.
Okay, so what would you suggest then to study to learn more? Because I'm not trying. Like I definitely appreciate the class. I'm just coming from the perspective that our people are being hurt by being all heebie-jeebie in this stuff instead of stuff that actually.
Our people would actually be better off if they understood this. They're on the heebie-jeebie Christianity shit. This was before Christianity. They got you off of this because it took your connection away to understanding how to govern yourself. That's really what this is. If you understand your own energy and how your energy works and moves, then you can truly govern yourself. If you don't, you cannot. That's why they took it away from you. If you don't understand how you truly work, then how can you govern yourself? You cannot. So if you need to understand more of this, a great book to get would be The Only Astrology Book You Will Ever Need. That's literally what it's called. You get that on Amazon for about $15. The only astrology book you will ever need. Okay, and the reason, and so we went into this, we went far past where we were supposed to go, but the reason I'm trying to get you guys to understand this is that law is energy, is the movement of energy. It's all that whole body of physical law is created off the movement of energy, which is the higher movement of energy is the galaxy, the movement of bodies, celestial bodies, and things of that nature. And if you don't understand how those things move, you won't fully grasp the physical system. Okay, now not to say you can't, but you won't fully grasp. You won't fully get the understanding of what they're trying to do, and then get the full benefit out of it. So that's all. I just want to leave that. And
thank you.
Anybody had any other thing before I go? I see David bounced off. He got a little frustrated.
Appreciate it. It's a lot of, I guess, for the topic at hand, there's great conversation in the background. I definitely agree with what you're saying. It's very important to distinguish between fact and belief, superstition and what is real.
The saying is, where the saying, know thyself, first of all, most people think that's a Christian saying. It's not. Those words are written on the temples or the pyramids in Egypt. It says the heaven of God is in heaven. I forgot the actual term. Look it up. Look up Egyptian, know thyself Egyptian quote, and you'll see the actual quote. I think it's like the temple of man is in heaven, and those who know themselves will know God, or something like that. But that's an Egyptian maxim or saying, and so it meant you need to know who you are, understand your energies, and know how you move, and then you know thyself. You will know everything, because you and the universe are one. All right, people.
Take care, man.
Good joke.
Thanks.
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Set them up.